The Rune Smith. Chapter 161. Back at the estate. Two horses were pulling a carriage through a nicely paved road made of stone. It was assembled with many smaller flattened stones which caused it to rock around more than it should. The horses' hooves made loud sounds as the carriage moved toward its destination. The coachman gave out a yawn before looking out into the distance. There he saw a large villa that clearly belonged to a noble family. The trees that were at the side of the road were so thick that they made this road look like a tunnel made from leaves. It was clear that these trees were tended to by a professional hand, as the tunnel of leaves was quite circular in shape. The morning rays of light pushed through the thick branches and lit up the path that ended at a large gate. Halt! The man that was on top of the carriage pulled on the horse reins to make them stop before the large entrance gate. The columns that these two gates were connected to had a certain characteristic knightly crest etched into them. They depicted a knight with a sword and shield on a horse that was standing up on its hind legs. "Good morning to you." After the guard got a good look at the carriage, he realized that it was one of their own. A similar crest adorned the side, which indicated that it was part of the same estate and that the person inside was important enough to ride in it. With a wave of his hand, he called out to the people behind the gate, "Open the gates." Soon he returned to his post while the large gate started being opened from the inside by some servants. There was a certain characteristic sound of old metal that followed the opening, which caused the person in the carriage to sign out, "The gate needs to be oiled." It was a young man's voice that was met by no reply, as he was sitting inside of the carriage by himself. Now, as it was passing through the entrance to the estate, he decided to move the blinds to the side to take a look. "Not much has changed since I left." As the carriage entered through the gates, he could see some servants moving around. The sound of the blacksmith caught his ear, as it made him recall a certain astray member of his family that he had recently bumped into. Just as the two had agreed, he had not disclosed their small get-together unless there was some kind of dire situation. He intended to keep his pledge. Finally, he heard the horses stopping as he finally arrived at his destination. He looked to the wooden door at the side and hesitated slightly. Soon though, he reached out with his hand to open it and stepped outside. The first thing he saw was a familiar face of a beautiful older woman that was slowly moving his way. "What are you waiting for? Why didn't anyone open the carriage for my Robert?" It was his mother Francine rushing his way while holding quite the expensive-looking gown. The dress was adorned with various jewels, and it was clearly not meant for fast walking. The life at the Knight Academy had been quite rough, even more for people like him that were at the bottom of the totem pole. Even in this estate, the servants didn't take him that seriously, as they were assigned to his two older brothers, Rainer and Edwin. The two had long since finished their squire training and become full-fledged knights. Even without asking, he knew that they wouldn't be here. Instead, they were probably out in the kingdom trying to earn merits to impress their father. One of them would be the next head of the Arden estate. From what Robert knew, both of them wanted the spot, and their father had not yet decided on who it would be. It also didn't seem that Wentworth Arden would be retiring anytime soon. His name as the Silver Wolf was widely known throughout the whole empire, and it was something hard to live up to. While looking at his mother, Robert felt quite nostalgic and recalled the days of hazing at the academy. Some of the high-born children despised the fact that his father had been able to rise to fame on the merit of his skills alone. He was a rare breed of person that could not be denied and caught the eye of the higher echelons of the aristocrats. The rest was history, as his military merit gained him a spot among the other nobles. Only after spending time at the academy for young knight candidates did Robert realize how much spite existed in those nobles. Without anything to show for themselves but their bloodline, they despised anyone that gained prestige by working hard. Any time they would lose in a training match to him or any other lesser noble, there would be consequences. Some knights used this pride as something they could latch on to. Becoming a retainer by intentionally losing or working with a higher-born noble as their follower was a ticket out for them. In hopes of attaining high positions of a knight captain at those higher noble estates, they would perform seedy tasks for their masters. Some of them included ganging up on lesser noble sons like Robert here in hopes of beating some sense into him. Yet Robert was quite stubborn and prideful as well. Even when they continued to come at him, he didn't falter. He could only smile to himself while remembering those days that he spent chasing his younger brother and tried to beat some sense into him just like these nobles tried. Those times were filled with him being pitted against Roland by his own mother. He didn't want to admit it, but back then he was behaving the same as those high-born nobles that wanted to beat the pecking order into him. Only after his brother was gone did he realize that he had been mistaken. Fate had mysterious ways of working as he found his lost brother Roland at the strangest of places. The rage he felt when he realized that he was doing better than expected with no intention of ever coming back. "It's fine, mother, just have the servants carry my luggage into my chamber, not like I will be staying for long. Oh, my little Robert is all grown up. Let me take a good look at you." Francine Arden placed her well-manicured hands on Robert's cheeks and took a good look at him. The woman was a lot smaller than her son, who was even slightly taller than Roland. Even then both of them paled in comparison to the bear-like being that their father was. The woman wasn't the youngest, but with a bit of makeup and some potions, she would be able to pass for a lady in her late 20s. Her hair was braided on the sides and coiled in a way over the ears that it formed horns on either side of her head. Robert didn't want to comment on this hairstyle as he had always preferred the simple loose long hair to be superior. His mother on the other hand liked to follow the noble trends and was an avid visitor to the aristocratic parties. He knew that his mother had somewhat of an inferiority complex to his father's other wife, Tabitha. While she did everything in her might to expand her influence in the noble circles, he knew that the high nobles would never really accept her as she was just a daughter of a wealthy merchant that bought his way into nobility. "I'm fine, mother, we should go inside." Robert felt a bit uncomfortable as his mother started looking at his face intently. He did not resist as it had been a while since he and his mom had some time to be together. While there was no one else to greet him here, he was happy that he still had his loving mother. Even though she was overprotective to a fault, he knew that she just did everything out of love. "No need to be shy with your mother, come, my son, tell your mother all about your life in the academy. To think that my son would be one of the top apprentice knights in the academy." Robert half smiled about that notion, as there was a certain reason that he had been pushed to the top of his class. Lucille de Vere was the real reason that he was able to ascend through the ranks while previously he was being suppressed by the highborn youths. Lucille's father found out about the little predicament and was more than glad to support the only knight that was involved with this predicament. Even though Percival and the knight responsible for the examination pushed the information down, the de Vere count wasn't someone that could be fooled easily. Out of fear of this issue ever coming out to light, which would lower the Academy's prestige, Robert was given a deal that he couldn't refuse. For his heroic deeds, he was raised up in the rankings to reflect more of his own true skills. Even though he somewhat knew that he deserved his spot in the first place, he was only receiving it due to his younger brother's involvement. Without Roland being there, he knew that Lucille would be dead along with him. Luckily for Roland, no one from the Knight Academy took the adventurer that was with them seriously. To them, he was just some commoner that did what he was paid for. No one would take his word above a noble's, so even if he tried to release the truth into the open, he would only get thrown into prison for offending someone from the noble caste. "Is father?" While wandering through the mansion corridor, he gave the question to his mother that was just constantly talking. "Your father is?" Francine stopped for a moment as she wasn't sure what to say. Even though Robert didn't show it, his mother knew that he wanted nothing more than to be praised by his father. Regretfully, the man in question was far too busy. As a high-ranking member of the kingdom's military, he was mostly indisposed. "Is that so? The border skirmishes have been slowly building up." Robert mumbled to himself, even though he knew that his father was busy. As his son, he wanted to be praised by someone that he aspired to be. The Arden Patriarch was the perfect goal for him, someone of lower status that gained fame and prestige by his own merits. "I'm sure your father is proud of you, let us not talk about him." Robert's mother clapped her hands and a few maids appeared before her. "Prepare some tea and snacks for me, don't make me and my son wait." "Yes, madam." The two girls bowed with their heads while Robert and Francine continued their slow walk through the corridor. On the walls, he could see some family paintings that depicted the old members of the Arden bloodline. There were many faces that he wasn't familiar with, but they all kind of looked similar to the man of the house. At the end of this corridor, there was a large painting. On it, Robert could see a large family consisting of himself and all his siblings. Even on it, he could see status being involved as his mother was sidetracked to the first wife. The person to the side at most was his half-brother Roland, the only one below him in status. Only recently did he realize how badly he had treated him. He was acting just like those weak high nobles that couldn't win over him with pure skill. Only now he realized that the circumstances of someone's birth were not something that should define a person. This was not something that most nobles agreed on, not even his own mother. While looking at the picture, his eyes trailed to his brother that he had found once more. That child, he was always a strange one. Strange, mother. Francine noticed where Robert was looking as she started to talk. Yes, he always had those dead eyes, never acted like a child his age. While he wanted to stop his mother from belittling his brother, he did have to agree that Roland was a peculiar person. Even in their younger days, he seemed fine with getting beaten up by him. Robert could also not remember ever seeing his younger brother crying. He could only attribute it to his high intelligence, which pushed him into becoming a mage and then a runesmith. But let us not talk about the dead. I'm sure the tea is ready now. Francine stopped in front of a large closed door and looked to the attendant on the side. Before the person could open the door for the lady, a strange sound was heard by them on the inside. It sounded as if something hit the floor and then started quickly running towards this exit. Brother Roland is not dead. The door was slammed open by a certain young lady. Robert was surprised to see this young girl that was wearing a long dress. It seemed that the get-up was unfinished, as some threads were standing out and her corset was hanging out from the back. Lucienne, that's now how a proper lady is supposed to conduct yourself. You were supposed to wait here for me and your brother. Why are you dressed like that? Please forgive us, madam, the young lady just doesn't want to be still. Two older ladies dressed in maid uniforms waddled over to where the group of three nobles was. Robert could see that they were out of breath, and by the way the room looked he knew the reason. The problem was his younger sister. She had far too much energy, as even now she was trying to run away from the two maids that wanted to dress her up as a proper young lady. Lucienne, stop this instant. Not until you take it back. Brother is still out there. You believe me, don't you? She quickly hid behind Robert, who was just standing there without knowing what to do. He knew that she was right, but he could not tell his young 10-year-old sister that Roland was out in some town working as a runesmith. I think you should listen to your mother, Lucienne. After reaching the age of 10 and receiving her mage class, he was sent to the Magic Academy for an aptitude test. After receiving good results, she was to remain there to get a proper education. She was too young to attend classes yet and was getting tutored by a costly magic teacher. From what he knew, his sister was quite a ball of energy and she was giving the magic tutor quite the headache. I don't need these dresses, I'm going to become a powerful mage. Soon she was forced from behind Robert as the maids started chasing her through the room. A little smile crept on his face as his mother joined into the fray and tried to catch the little young lady. While normally he would agree with his mother when it came to Lucienne, he wasn't that sure. With the aptitude for magic, the world was her oyster. She didn't need to be stuck in this bubble that the aristocrats created for themselves. After seeing his younger brother that looked happier than ever, he realized that there was more to this world than met the eye. With that in mind, he entered the loud room and closed the door behind himself. He wasn't sure what the future would bring, but as long as he had his family by his side, he would be happy. Still, the words that his brother told him lingered in his mind. Someone was responsible for the attack on his half-sibling, and he would need to figure out who before this secret of his came out to light. Chapter 162. Time moves on. That will be all for today. You should go over the research material that I have provided you before contacting me again. Also, don't forget to catch up with the basics, my friend. I will, until next time. Roland turned off the communication crystal on which a smug-looking cat was displayed. The exchange between the two had been going on for several months, but he still had so much to learn. After turning off the crystal ball, Roland looked to the side. There on his desk he could see a large stack of papers, books, and scribbles. This was all the research material the cat professor had dumped on him. He really did send me the school books this time around. Through the months of their exchanges, Roland had continued to improve on the runic diagrams that he was given while taking snippets of knowledge for himself. Finally, for one reason or another, his associate decided to just give him all of the basic rune-related academy books that they usually gave to their mages. This was quite a pile of knowledge, and it required several gale birds to deliver for a span of a month. Now he had a compendium of materials that could fill in the gaps in his runic comprehension. It seemed that the cat was fed up with Roland asking questions every time the two were talking. Thus he was given some homework to get through the fundamentals first before their partnership continued. While Roland was knowledgeable with the outer runic components at this point in time, he was unable to affect the runic programming. Most of the time he found himself copying pre-existing code that he discovered in runes and then hoped that it would stick. All of this research material would guide him from the beginning and teach him the inner workings of the runic code. It was quite a stack of papers to go through, but luckily with his increased intelligence and his newest skill that allowed him to read multiple pages at once, he hoped to slog through it fast. "Hey boss, I'll be heading out for tonight, see ya in the morning. Try not to get in trouble." "Ha, when did I ever get in trouble?" Roland rolled his eyes while looking through the window through which he could see Bernier. His assistant was using his newly gained raise to go to town and have a good drink. It was probably not the only thing that he would be getting there, but not like Roland was interested in Bernier's nightlife. As long as he returned when it was time for work, then all was fine. A few weeks had passed since his new store opened for business, and business was booming. He underestimated how fast the adventurers went through lower-level magic equipment. With the close proximity to the dungeon, these items were being used for all they were worth. Many of them got lost in the process of hunting monsters, and the runes were being used up quite fast. Some adventurers, instead of using the repairs, preferred to just put some more gold down and get an improved weapon after using it for a month instead. It turned out that there were far many more adventurers in town than there were craftsmen. While regular weapons were easy to find, it wasn't the same for the wares he was peddling. So on the first day, he was able to get rid of all the old stock that was piling up in his workshop. Even with the lowered prices, he was able to make nice profits that translated well into future progress. Elydia was doing a nice job at selling and presenting everything to the new customers. He had written down all the various runes that the items came equipped with, and she was able to learn all of the uses of the items they were selling in just a few days. She was ready to fight through the first day, as if she knew that there would be such an outcry for the magic weapons. Even Roland needed to come help, as the people were clamoring to get in. He clearly underestimated the worth of a magic weapon that was going for under the market price. There were even a few merchants that he recognized from the city. They were probably intending to sell the items in different cities due to the dwarves. Since everything was going well, Roland finally decided to raise Bernier's wages by a bit. Even though it wasn't that much, the dwarf was quite ecstatic. Now with the hiring of Elydia, both of them had the weekdays off while the store was closed. While both of his workers would have time to spend their hard-earned money and take a break, he would continue with his grind. He needed to inscribe more runes and produce more wares to sell, while also improving on his golem and turret designs. Now, after starting his own business, he realized that being a regular employee was not the end of the world. Being the owner of a new shop forced him to work even harder if he actually intended to be successful. While Bernier was in the tavern getting drunk, he would be going through runic diagrams and lists of components. While Elydia finally had some time to spend with her family and watch over them, he would be hammering away on the new golem design that would now have 6 legs instead of 4. No rest for the wicked, hey. Roland gave out a sigh, but he was somewhat feeling content with this new situation. While he was not so keen on working for others, it wasn't the same when he was doing it for himself. Everything was under his control, and depending on the circumstances he could always decide to take a break when he wanted to. While it looked like he was becoming shackled with his new responsibilities, he could not be any freer. There was no debt holding him down, and his craft gave him something that he could apply in other places. Even if this little business fell through, he would still be fine, all thanks to his hard work. He had gained a skill that could not be denied by others. This didn't mean that he intended his little venture to be a failure. Growing dungeon cities like this were quite rare, and he would not be able to fight against monsters like the Dwarven Union in cities that they had a stronger presence in. Before I forget. While Roland ended his call with the magic cat, he still needed to stay in touch with the person that introduced him to it. This person's name was Lucille de Vere, who came from quite the prestigious Count family. "Good evening, sir." I mean sir. Wayland. "Good evening, hope I didn't call at a bad time." While Lucille knew about his true heritage, he still urged her to call him by his current alias. He had no idea if these magical instruments could be recorded by outside sources. But going by the fact that they had some type of signal that was going between them, it was possible that it could be intercepted by a third party. "The professor has been talking fondly of you. I never seen him so cheerful when talking about someone else." "Hey? Are you sure that you weren't talking with some other talking cat?" Roland was a bit confused, as the cat never shied away from telling him how incompetent he was when it came to the basics. All the questions he posed were answered in a smug way, and he started to slowly fear bringing up things that might make him seem uneducated. This was also why he was glad that he was given so much research material to work with. With all this knowledge, he hoped that the cat would finally get off his back. "You must be joking, sir." "Wayland." Lucille laughed a bit while looking straight at the crystal ball before her. The picture that he was getting on his side was distorted in a sort of fisheye lens way. This made Lucille's nose look a bit unflattering, but it also gave him a better look into the room she was staying in. It was clear that she had relocated from the magical academy to somewhere else. This brought up a question in Roland's mind that he had to ask. Did Robert finish his night training? "Ah, glad that you brought that up, sir. Robert has left for his home not so long ago. At this very moment he might already be there." "By home, do you mean the Arden estate?" "Yes." Lucille nodded while Roland moved his face a bit to the side. He looked out through the window and towards one of the moons that was peeking out through the clouds. His ice mage friend was not aware of this, but Roland was still worried about the family situation. With his academy life over, Robert would be assigned a proper position somewhere. He could either be drafted into the army and become a commanding officer due to his noble lineage. The other way would be to come under the command of another noble and join their private army. His rank would depend on this higher noble. The people that went with the first option would have to go through a long period of trials before they were lifted up into a prestigious position. The latter could soar up high in no time depending on who they were working for. It was also considered far less dangerous to work for another rich noble. Most of the time a person like Robert would just become a personal bodyguard that would just shadow their master from behind. Most work they would put in would be to continue their training while their masters are at the main house. Depending on the high noble they were serving, it could be a very easy position. Even without asking, Roland was aware which path his older brother would take. It didn't take much to realize what kind of person Robert was and how he intended to make his mark on the world. "So, do you know which regiment he intends to join?" "Ah, so you knew about his decision?" "Sir." Robert wasn't sure, but he mentioned that he was interested in the cavalry divisions. "He really does intend to follow in his footsteps, hey?" Roland mumbled to himself while Lucille was left with some scrambled audio on her end. "What was that, sir?" "Wayland? Some footsteps. You'll have to excuse me, I was just thinking out loud." Roland was aware of his father's military merits, and he too had started out in the cavalry as a knight. He had worked his way up from a newbie knight to the rank of knight commander, which was the highest title a regular knight could hope for. Then he had pushed towards an even higher ranking as he achieved the noble status. It would be a hard thing to mirror, but Robert could also go through this path. Then he could actually receive his own noble title that would not be under the Arden estate umbrella. He could choose to either keep the Arden name or to use a different one. With a new name, he would be asked to create a crest of his own and he would receive some land. So, did you finish your academy training? Will you become a court mage or maybe a free mage, lady? Lucille. Roland shifted the conversation in a different direction. He was mostly interested if Robert didn't tell his father anything. As an existence that could lead a small army, his father would have no problem of forcefully dragging him back to the estate. Lucille did assure him that his secret was safe with them, but Roland was still scared that the information could slip for one reason or another. Oh, I haven't decided yet. Papa wants me to stay at the estate for now. After the incident, he has become overprotective. Lucille was still a daughter of a count and also a skillful mage. She had a lot of worth and her close call with death was something that her father was aware of. While most of it was downplayed by Percival and the examiner, some info had made it through. If he knew that his daughter was stuck wandering underground caves for a week, unsupervised, then some heads might fall. The fall was apparently downplayed to a few hours and Robert was given a big reward in the hopes of shutting them up. Roland wasn't sure, but probably either contracts or knightly vows were used to keep anyone from telling everything. With how little nobles cared about the words of commoners and adventurers, the event was successfully contained. The truth would probably never reach his ears, and with how Lucille was going along with the lie, there would be no reason for him to push the issue further. That doesn't sound so bad. Why don't you join the mage order at the academy? You always seemed like the scholarly type. There were a few ways for a mage to make a living. A court magician was given a lot of money, but they were required to answer the call of war when the country requested it. A free mage, just as the name stated, didn't offer any benefits but gave freedom. Lucille could join one of the free mage guilds that were in this kingdom. They would help her level up further while requesting some tasks here and there. Adventuring was not out of the picture, as some guilds were specifically there to lend out magicians to the adventurer guild. In Roland's opinion, Lucille still had a craving for knowledge. While she managed to help him during the monster battles in the dungeon, she was not quite ready to become a battle mage. The decision was her to make, but with her father getting involved in this predicament. I sure would love to work with the professor, maybe I could become his assistant. Roland smiled as Lucille continued to talk. The conversation lasted for about 15 minutes before the magic was at an end. With his monthly checkup, he was finally free to continue with his work. When Robert joins the army, he won't have time for anything. It could take years for him to return home. His brother would be joining the army for sure. The knights were used to patrol the borders as well as for monsters that lived outside the dungeons. They would not be given much free time to visit their families, and certainly not when they are fresh as Robert was. With the connection ending, Roland got up from his spot and stared at the stack of papers on his desk. I think I'll leave those for later. He didn't feel like going through more archaic books about runs would do him any good today, so he moved back into his workshop to get his hands dirty. The way into his underground lair was now behind a bookshelf that he could open by pulling on a specific book. Before going down, he looked at a certain ruby wolf and gave his head a rough pat. I'll leave the house to you. Agni gave out a bark while flopping his tongue out, his tail wiggled while he stood up proudly. It was as if he was telling Roland that he could leave everything to him. The entrance slowly revealed itself and he went down the stairs. The door that was previously there had been reinforced with a few layers of metal. On the right of it, there was a little glowing crystal that illuminated this dark staircase. Roland dug into his pocket to pull out a small dark card. On it there were many various tiny runes. The moment he moved this card towards this gem, the card started to shine. The red coloring of the gem switched to green and he could hear the locks on the door being undone. The moment the doors opened, he was greeted with his old blacksmithing workshop. The tools were neatly hung up on the sides in an orderly fashion, and on one of the benches he could see an unfinished item. It looked like a spider leg made from shiny silver metal with various runic inscriptions covering the surface area. This whole place was lit up with orange light, as bright blue light always reminded him of his old working situation that he didn't have any fond memories of. After approaching the tool rack, he took out a hammer along with a little chisel. The two items were then used to finish the rune craft on the improved golem leg that he intended to use in the next design. The hammer lit up in bright blue and revealed many various runic symbols on it. With a gentle tap, he used the hammerhead to connect with the small chisel. A tiny bolt of mana then traveled through this special tool all the way to the golem leg. When the light connected with the silvery metal, a tiny runic component appeared on the unworked side of the golem leg. Late into the night did his dinging sounds continue as the runesmith worked on his wares. In his mind this was only the beginning, there was so much work to do but so little time on his hands. So did the time pass for the Albrook City runesmith, and his shop continued to raise eyebrows and cause headaches for his competition. Chapter 163, skipping ahead. Click. It should work now. A certain runesmith that was wearing protective goggles inserted a certain metallic cylinder into another part of machinery. This machine from the outside looked like a six-legged spider, complete with a large sparkly eye on where a spider's cephalothorax would be. This was a new and improved version of a golem that Roland had been working on for quite some time. It was the size of a drone, not really that big. It was somewhat elongated in the back, which made it look as if it had the iconic spider abdomen. With a little click, the construction was activated and the drone sprung to life by raising itself up. It possessed a functional head with a large red eye through which it could see its creator standing right in front of it. Everything seems normal, energy readings are all in the green. Roland nodded while looking at his newest creation that had come a long way. Its more slick design to its predecessors made it look a lot more futuristic for the era that he found itself in. The chassis looked as if it was polished to perfection and could reflect light thanks to its chrome outlook. "Are the testing dummies ready?" "Aye, boss." Roland called out to Bernier that was on the opposite side of this large chamber. The two were in a location devoid of windows, and the source of light was a set of magical crystals that gave enough light as modern-day light bulbs. It looked like a large warehouse, and at the end, there were several wooden testing dummies that had the vague shape of a human. The walls looked like they were made from hardened stone that formed in a natural way. The ceiling as well looked to be quite smooth and painted white, which made the whole place quite bright. Thanks to the earth magic that was prevalent in this world, building underground spaces like this was simple. With enough mana and the correct spell, it was able to harden the walls on a molecular level by binding the smaller grains of sand to each other. It made it as sturdy as concrete, and there was no danger of the place ever falling down on their heads. Even if there happened to be a sore spot or if the walls got damaged in the process of testing magic, it would be quite easy to repair the walls, as soil was an easy commodity to come by here. The only big limitation was the look, as the hardening had to be done along the way of digging up the larger space. "Good, go behind the protective shielding then, I'll start the test." Bernier ducked behind a special wall that had some cut-out spaces to allow a person to see through them. These spaces weren't left blank but had thick glass that was quite resistant. Safety around the workshop was paramount. After suffering through various explosions, one that even left him bedridden for a few days, Roland had decided to put safety first. With that in mind, he was unwilling to let any large shrapnel get embedded in his body ever again. Luckily, the healing potions in this world as well as healing magic allowed people to get healthy quite fast. Even scarring tissue didn't form as long as you got the right treatment. "Drone, activate battle mode." He gave the command, and the red gem that was the spider golem's main sensor started glowing. A little compartment opened up in the middle of its body and something started rising out. It looked like an elongated tube that was placed on a jointed robotic arm of sorts. It was clearly a cannon that had been hidden in the golem's main body. It was almost as long as the robot's entire body. The whole length of this cannon was covered in runic symbols that were visible to the naked eye. "Drone, engage." Roland pointed at the leftmost training dummy with his finger while giving the order. The spider drone shifted its body towards the dummy and took aim. The cannon that was on its back adjusted to the target. Soon the runes that covered it started glowing as it activated. A bright blue bolt of condensed mana energy emerged from this cannon and quickly connected with the test dummy. The wooden construction promptly exploded, sending splinters everywhere. The top part of the dummy was blown right off, but the golem didn't stop. It continued to fire at the target while bracing its body with those spider-like legs. Each time it fired a bolt of the magic energy, it was pushed back slightly and the legs took the recoil nicely. "Drone, disengage!" Roland shouted to give the golem the order to a ceasefire. When he looked into the distance, he could only see the charred remains of what used to be a dummy. "Damn, does that golem have something against the targets I made?" Bernier called out from behind cover while standing next to his boss. Both of them clearly saw the golem continue to shoot at the wooden target even though there was nothing left of it. The only thing that now remained was the log that was placed in the ground to hold it in place. "I guess it needs some adjustments, but this is within the predicted calculations, let us move on." Roland, on the other hand, was not that concerned about the golem's tendencies for destruction. He could turn down the setting, but this was supposed to be a test for a battle golem. Making sure that the target was dead would be one of its functions. "Drone, battle mode off, engage shield." While walking out from behind cover, Roland gave the next voice command. The smoking cannon slid back into the drone's body while it started to glow. The runes became clear again as a blue energy shield appeared. The shield looked like a small dome that covered the spider golem's whole body and connected to the ground. Roland walked over and placed himself a few meters away from his creation. On his arm, he was wearing an inconspicuous glove. He raised his hand and opened his palm towards the drone. Within a second, the glove gave out a similar bluish glow before a bolt of magic energy emerged from it. It traveled at a high speed and connected with the mana shield that the golem was producing. The construction buckled a bit and the golem was pushed back, but it managed to survive the first hit. With another bolt of energy, the shield started buckling under the stress, and with the third one it shattered instantly. "3 good shots, hey!" Roland moved his hand down, as even though the third shot caused the barrier to crack, the golem was still there. He did lower the output of his mana bolt to something a regular mage would be able to perform. If he actually used his whole magical energy to perform this test, he feared that his creation would blow to kingdom come with one shot. "Drone, shield on." After destroying the golem's shield, he gave the command for it to reform it. This time around it wasn't as fast, but with time the shield spell was reformed and operational again. With another salvo of mana bolts, he confirmed that the shield was just as sturdy as before. As long as the power source is intact, it will be able to reform this shield. While Roland was rubbing his chin in contemplation, Bernier decided to pop his head out from his spot. "Hey boss, want me to give it a whack?" Roland spotted a large sledgehammer over Bernier's shoulder. His assistant had quite a grin on his face after going through several testing golems. This was mostly how the tests ended. "No, that's fine, we'll leave this one alone." "Is that so?" Bernier looked a bit saddened by this revelation. Roland could understand his sentiment, as it was quite fun to destroy things, even more, if you spend months making them. "Boss, you did it. I didn't think I'd be able to assist in making a new type of golem. Are you going to try selling it? I bet it would fetch quite the price." "Sell it? Maybe later. It's not really finished." "Not finished? It looked capable to me. I still need to test it in the field. The voice commands are a bit of a problem too." "They are?" Bernier looked at Roland with a confused expression on his face. To the half-dwarf this was enough. Most golemic creations used voiced commands. If this spider golem could carry them out, it was already just as good as anything that was out there on the market. Roland saw it a bit differently. The voice commands were slow and he wanted his creation to be somewhat faster on the uptake. It took him a long time to get to this point, but he wanted to make something more intelligent that would be able to swap between battle modes on its own without orders. He already produced a first alpha version of that golem operating system, but it hadn't been field tested yet. Only when these spider droids were able to attack and shield themselves when danger was approaching would they be complete. For now, the droid only went equipped with 2 spells. The cannon fired off mana blasts, while the shield was an enhanced mana shield that was made sturdier thanks to his runes. The cannon design allowed for a more concentrated beam instead of a blast, but still allowed the golem to pack a punch. The trickiest part of this whole construction was energy management. Without his newest invention, he would have not been able to get this far. While he would do nothing more than to sell this golem, he wasn't sure if that would be such a good idea. He moved over to it and picked it up with both of his hands. The spider droid wasn't that big, he could easily carry it around with one hand over his shoulder. When it stood on the ground, it wasn't taller than a middle-sized dog. After placing his creation on the nearby workbench, he took out the heart and soul of it. In a small compartment on the back revealed the tube that he previously inserted. A gust of cold hit his face as this was opened, as this was the drone's battery that required a lot of cooling. Even with the frost runes working around it to cool it down, the cylinder was still warm to the touch when he pulled it out. Without the need for any instruments, he could feel how much magical energy was left over. Unless it's involved in heavy combat, it should be operational for several days with one of these runic batteries. Inside of this cylinder was a certain magical crystal. When slicing the crystal in half, a person would see a perfect octagon. The shape was important as well as the length and the ending point that focused the mana from this crystal on a special rune. This crystal was nothing more than a reworked golem core that he was able to get from the dungeon. After going through all the knowledge that the professor gave him, Roland was able to figure out another way for this storage device. Golem cores were massive data storage. They were able to store a complex program that could simulate a living being. They also had some energy retaining capabilities that he was using now. With this battery and his runic generators, he was now able to store enough mana in this creation to power a golem. The batteries could be reused many times before they deteriorated, which would allow him to forego Alokan's fluid as a power source. This was all done for his own independence, as getting enough of that magical fuel would be quite hard even with his black market contacts in place. Well, isn't she a beaut? Bernier glanced over Roland's shoulder while whistling. The outer shell was created with the help of his assistant and was made from metal they smelted in the runic smelter. Bernier, you can go now. Really, boss? Yeah, you did ask to have a day off early today. Thank you, boss. You're the best boss in the whole wide world. Yeah, have fun and try not to overdo it. I still can't believe that you two got together. Roland wanted to laugh at the strange pairing that emerged after these years of working. He could even recall the days that he had to go make some deliveries instead of his assistant, as the person in question was a danger to Bernier's health. What can I say, boss? When someone catches my eye, I just go for it. It's just a matter of time till they fall to my allure. No lady can resist my manly charms. Bernier puffed out his chest while standing proudly. Roland could only roll his eyes and look past his assistant's shoulder. Oh hey, Diana, is that you? Diana? Wait, Pumpkin, I can explain. Bernier's head made a sharp turn as he looked behind. Where he expected to see his future wife, there was nothing at all. Just the exit sign above the door leading outside. Pumpkin, hey? Such a ladies' man. Boss, please don't scare me like that. Roland chuckled to himself while Bernier gave out a sigh of relief. Soon the two parted ways. Bernier headed outside to the ever-growing city of Albrook to visit his soon-to-be wife Diana. It was a strange pairing, but apparently, Bernier was quite infatuated with the large lady and she finally gave in to his courting attempts. Maybe he likes being tossed around in the bedroom. While walking up the stairs, a strange image of his assistant and his large voluptuous wife popped into his head. He could only see a lot of back pain in Bernier's future, but if that was his type, then he made his choice. After going through a few safety checkpoints, he was back in his own house. A few changes took place here, as he had added a nice shower to go with his bathroom. The tub was nice, but sometimes a quick shower was all a person needed. The shower head was quite silly to look at, as it was just a thick bucket with holes in it. The runes that were all over the surface lit up in red as they heated up the water that was inside of it. When it trickled down onto his body, it was nice and warm. With the addition of this shower, his bathroom began getting quite steamy. At the end of his cleaning session, he moved over to the mirror. After wiping the steam from it, he looked at the face before him. How long has it been since I've come to this world? 15 years, or was it 16? A lot of time had passed since he arrived in this city of Albrook. Before he arrived it was barely a town, without the dungeon it would have probably stayed a rural village with nothing but farms around it. Now on the other hand it was slowly coming together. His store had managed to survive the war with the dwarves that still didn't want to give up with their price war. With the emergence of the black market, the price gouging that they were previously implementing was not a realistic option. The low-priced goods could be easily smuggled out of the city and sold for a profit which just sent more people his way as there were not enough goods to go around. These coming 3 years weren't that eventful. He spent them mostly on runic research and reading magic books. He didn't realize how much he had skipped with the help of his debugging skill, and it took him quite some time before he was able to produce the current golem. I think that now I should be ready. Ready for what? While going out of the bathroom he mumbled to himself. This was heard by someone that was just coming into his house. A certain woman with glasses stood there and was looking straight at Roland that only had a towel around his waist. Oh! Both of them looked at each other for a moment before Roland spoke out. Elydia, were you there? The woman turned her head to the side while blushing slightly. Soon she ducked to a side room while leaving Roland there. He stood there for a moment while still rubbing his wet hair with a towel. Please put on some clothes, I'll have supper ready in a moment, so wait in the dining room. Roland put his towel down, and the moment food was mentioned he heard his belly rumbling. Thus he quickly ducked into his bedroom to get some proper clothes, as Elydia's cooking was something that he looked forward to. Chapter 164 Fresh Relationship. Here you go. Thank you. Roland took the salt shaker that Elydia passed him and put some of it into his food. After placing it to the side, the two people in the room dug into the homemade meal. After spending most of his stay in this world eating at taverns and pubs, this was certainly a nice change of pace. The food in this world lacked seasoning, and the only way to go around it was to have a person with a cooking skill to prepare the meal. The basic cooking skill was something everyone could learn, but it didn't really help out with anything. Only when it went past the basic one would it allow the user to affect the meal's taste. With a high enough skill, even food that was close to being rotten could be turned into a gourmet meal. Elydia here was in possession of a higher tier cooking skill. While her talents were in mathematics, she actually was in possession of the housekeeper class. This was quite the rudimentary class which allowed people to get a plethora of skills to help around the house. It was one of the bonuses of not being given a proper combat class. Non-combat related classes like these that weren't proper crafting classes either could be leveled up fast. They were more like side classes that gave people some quality of life skills. They still counted as proper classes though, even when they required less experience to level, unless a person didn't intend to go towards the crafter or combatant route, they would not change into such a class. Elydia on the other hand was actually at a higher level than him. She had leveled many of what would be considered side classes, as she was unable to get any of the harder ones. This was nothing out of the ordinary, this was actually what the majority of the commoners were. When asked about the choice of class, Elydia explained that she mostly took it for the children. He didn't want to dig in too deep about her past, but the orphanage that she ran required someone that could turn meager food into something healthier. Now he was profiting from her chosen skills, as he could receive home-cooked meals almost every day. The silent meal continued as both of them just ate. Roland thought back to how they ended up in this situation. It was the little things that somewhat pushed the two into each other's arms. Working together at the same spot and constantly bumping into each other while handling runic equipment was a daily occurrence. It also helped that Bernir along with Elydia's two siblings constantly egged the two on. After a silly misunderstanding about a marriage proposal, they just went along with it. One thing led to another and the two started to slowly grow fond of each other's company. At first, Roland was against the relationship ever blooming, as he was clearly Elydia's boss. The power imbalance was obvious here, but apparently, in this world, this was a given. Unless the man wasn't in a higher position than the woman, she would not take them seriously. Dating was also something foreign, as most couples formed for the sole purpose of starting a family. This was a bit of a shock to him, as he never really thought about starting one before. If he counted the years from his old world, he would actually be an old man in his 40s. Now he was stuck in a young 20-year-old's body that was in his prime. His looks along with his current status as a runesmith would probably allow him to experiment, but he just wasn't interested in such things. Someone more grounded like Elydia here was much of a better catch, as she could help him out in ways that only a woman could. She was already taking care of a lot of orphans, so there was no real push of getting any kids. It looked like a good match even though their conversations were quite basic. How were things at the store today? It has slowed down lately, but we are still making some profits. But you did spend a lot on those new wind turbines and those wall improvements and those, what do you call them, defensive turrets? Roland started coughing after hearing Elydia listing all of his expenses. Being that she was an accountant by class, he gave her access to his expenses. He had a bad habit of almost instantly spending whatever he had earned on new materials that he still had to use the black market for. Even though the Dwarf Union was unable to price gouge him out of business, they still kept him from getting access to the merchants in a normal way. This meant that he had to spend a bit more on those materials, and the deliveries were also slower. His little farmhouse was now surrounded by a large brick wall. The cactus turrets that he previously designed were spread out through this wall and pointing mostly on the inside. They were designed not to harm people that were just there to watch, otherwise he would have a lot of dead customers. Okay, we might be a little bit in the red this month, but I'm sure that we'll manage to get through it eventually. Elydia just raised her eyebrow at him while standing up. She grabbed his plate that was licked clean, and he could have sworn that he saw her smile for a moment before turning back into mom mode. Wayland. She wanted to say something but at the last moment stopped herself. Never mind, I need to go to the orphanage. I'll see you tomorrow and try to get some sleep. Luckily for him, Elydia was not the type to complain too much. If he asked her if there was something wrong, she would tell him, but she would not talk his ear off throughout the day. I always get enough sleep, he replied while also standing up. Elydia just rolled her eyes at him again while he turned his head to the side. After some team dishwashing, she made her way outside the house. Hold on, I'll walk you back to the city, it's getting late. It was after closing time for the shop, and his new girlfriend was an easy target for any stray monster or mugger that came around these parts. Before the two started spending more time with each other, Elydia tended to go home along with Korgak or anyone that replaced him. Now she stayed longer to either cook or hand him some leftovers that she made at the orphanage. That place was still her main home, and he wasn't comfortable enough to have all of those orphans move here. Though depending on how much leftover money from his ventures he would get, he could place another building on the empty plot of land that he bought. Before the city population exploded, he did buy out the unused farmland around his house. This land was barren and the soil wasn't really something that could be used for cultivation. Instead, he could place a dorm-like building to move the orphans to, that is if he ever got enough gold coins to funnel into his ever-rising runic experiments. As it stood now, he was barely making it through the weeks. Agni can escort me, you should get some rest, I know that you didn't get any sleep yesterday, just look at your eyes. Elydia shook her head while putting on her coat. I'm fine, I have sleep resistance, something like this doesn't faze me at all. Roland smiled while flexing a bit to show off. He wasn't lying even though he didn't look the greatest. His body was young and healthy. Sleep wasn't something that he needed that much, and he would be fine with 3 hours per day. Stop that, you need to take better care of yourself, one of these days you will collapse in that workshop of yours. Elydia grumbled slightly and delivered a smack to Roland's upper arm as he was showboating. I'll be fine, I'm not a child. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Woof. Almost on cue, Agni decided to finally show up. The adult mystical ruby wolf was quite large and seemed even taller when walking next to someone like Elydia that was a head shorter than Roland. Okay, I'll get some rest, I promise. Elydia petted Agni's head while narrowing her eyes at Roland as she didn't know if she could trust those words. Take care, call me when you get home. I will. Before leaving, Elydia moved a bit closer and looked up at Roland. After a moment of silence, he realized what it was about and leaned his head down. A little wet smooch was placed on his cheek, but he also noticed her recoil slightly. Prickly. I guess I should shave. He did tend to lose track of time, so he didn't have enough time to take care of his stubble. While some people liked long or short beards, his new girlfriend clearly preferred when he was clean-shaven. Roland remained in the doorway while Elydia and Agni disappeared into the forest. His tamed beast was quite intelligent and known around the city. While they wouldn't allow him to wander into it alone, they would not attack him out in the open. Roland crafted him a special collar with a name tag. This was so that people could identify him as a tamed beast, but also acted as a shielding device and a tracker. Agni had leveled up a bit in these years, so there wouldn't be many people that could beat him easily. He was still a monster, and he received a slight boost to his stats over human counterparts. Do I really look that tired? After Elydia left, he examined his face in the mirror. Maybe because he didn't really spend that much time looking through his features, he never really noticed the changes. Elydia, on the other hand, apparently did. This fact was somewhat embarrassing but yet endearing. Having someone that actually paid attention to him and cared was not something that he was used to that much. I look fine. Even then he just shrugged, as this was not the time for resting. He was already planning his next move that would fix all of his money problems. Through the years he kept a close look at a certain spot in the dungeon. Luckily for him, no other person with a similar magic aptitude was able to find the runic markings that led to his next destination. This was of course the cavern where he found the precious metals when his brother visited this city. That small pocket of treasures would be just the thing that he needed to get ahead. His wares were selling, but he was certainly not the only magical smith in the city. The dwarves, the auction house, and even the Adventurers Guild competed with him for customers. While he was making enough to sustain his crippling crafting addiction, this was slowly reaching a boiling point. His level, knowledge, and skills were reaching a high enough level for him to take the next step and use more exotic resources. These rare materials were required for better golems and higher grade weapons. While his runes gave him an advantage over the competition, they had better smithing resources. Bernier and Roland improved in smithing, but they were nowhere near the experts that some of the dwarves were. This gap could be closed with a rarer metal that gave a magical sword more uses. These materials would help him put the items he was making in the premium category. For now, he was a bit short of it, as he was still sticking to the smelted metals in his runic smelter that to this day was seeing good use. Name: Roland Arden, L116. Classes: T2 Runesmith Lord, L41 Primary, T1 Mage, L25 Secondary, T1 Runic Monoscribe, L25X, T1 Runic Blacksmith, L25 Tertiary. HP: 5297/5297. MP: 11023/13053. SP: 6099/7099. Strength: 142. Agility: 108. Dexterity: 171. Vitality: 143. Endurance: 154. Intelligence: 209. Willpower: 189. Charisma: 18. Luck: 10. Roland glanced at his stats that had increased through the years. The slowdown effect was real, as even though he didn't sleep much and visited the dungeon on a semi-regular basis, he wasn't able to progress past his Runesmith Lord class yet. The monsters in the dungeon weren't high level enough for him to make any significant gains. The only reason he was able to come this far was through his old experience point trick. The Tier 3 schematics that he was given to improve upon were a major source of points. Together with his daily routine of crafting runes, working on his golem designs, and battle training, he was able to reach this point. His skills also didn't level up as fast as they used to. The most interesting event was when he reached over 200 intelligence points. This gave him the Brilliant Eye trait, which increased his mana pool even further by a flat 1000 points. It also seemed to further increase his memory and aided his parallel thinking skill. There were some new runesmith-specific skills that he unlocked, but for now, he needed to focus on other things. Even though he was dissatisfied with his progress, he knew that not many people in his age bracket had the stats that he did. Probably if he wasn't incentivized to get stronger, he would not have gotten past the 100th level yet. The boss that he met there was well past the 100th level and was not the only obstacle. He would need to battle through corridors of strange beings to first get to him. Then after defeating him, he would still need to venture towards that cavern with the metals and mine them. Depending on how long that would take him, the boss monster could respawn and pose a threat once more. He needed to account for this and plan for a prolonged dungeon dive that could even take up a week or two. Without the nobles holding him back and a few shortcuts, he knew the journey towards the lake of lava wouldn't take him that long. He also needed to make sure that he wasn't spotted entering the lake. If rumors spread about a strange individual entering a secret chamber in the lake, others would come snooping around. There was also the option of entering the cavern from the other side. This could be achieved with a degree of climbing skills that he lacked for now. In the future, he hoped to design some drones that could scale the wall and mine the resources themselves, but for now, he needed to be the one to put himself in danger. This is the best time to make a little venture there. Robert was out in the field trying to earn his stripes as a knight. Lucille, on the other hand, took his advice to heart and decided to become a teacher at the Magical Academy. He stayed in contact with her and knew that she mostly did it to evade the ever-coming marriage proposals from young lords. While Roland knew that Robert and Lucille had some feelings for each other, their future looked bleak. He knew that her family would probably start increasing the pressure on their daughter the longer she remained without a husband. They would certainly not allow her to get with a third son of a baron that was only a regular knight. Unless he proved himself in some way, Robert had a hard path ahead of him. There was a certain event that was coming along that could help him with that, but for someone, without much backing, it was an uphill battle. I should probably worry about myself first. With the drone testing being done, he could move along to the next phase of his plan. With long strides, he walked back into his workshop. There, after a few button clicks, he was back in his old workplace. After years of renovation, this didn't look anything like a blacksmith workshop. Many large machines with runes on them were scattered around that made the process of crafting streamlined. For now, he ignored all of those runic tools while going towards a different section of this underground lair. In another room that was also closed off to anyone without a key. It reacted to his mana signature and opened inside. The lights slowly went on. There, right at the end, stood a large metallic creation. It didn't look like something made for combat, it was bulky and looked like someone attached legs to a boiler. I guess you'll be seeing some use soon. Chapter 165, Time to Explore Again. Hey? What's that sound? Asterisk clang 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 asterisk. A strange sound entered the ears of a couple of adventurers that were standing before the entrance to the Albrook City dungeon. After many years of exploring, the dungeon was finally given a rating of C. The dungeon ratings were similar to grades, with S being above A for special ranked dungeons. A C-rated dungeon told people that the strongest creatures that they could find there were below Tier 3. A rating of C and could be given to such a dungeon if, for instance, it produced one final boss that was at the Tier 3 level of strength. With the strongest creature being below that level, it was given the C rating. A B rating would be given to dungeons with some Tier 3 creatures lurking on the more difficult lower levels. An A rank would mean that the prevalence of Tier 3 was quite severe. This didn't mean that a high-graded dungeon couldn't have low-level creatures wandering in the earlier stages. The new adventurers would have to take into consideration that a stronger creature could appear on the easier levels. Thus it was much safer for them to slowly level up through the easier dungeons unless they wanted to encounter monsters a full tier above them. This caused this Albrook dungeon to be mostly populated by newer adventurers. The layout caused the easy monsters to stay on the upper levels, which left all the new adventurers a safe space to train up. It was also still enough for the more veteran gold adventurers to find something for themselves. It became a mid-range dungeon that could be used by aspiring adventurers almost all the way up towards their Tier 3 change. Normally gold adventurers when approaching the 150th level would form large parties with each other and head out to a berated dungeon. There they would attack the lower level Tier 3 monsters as it was faster than sticking to monsters on their own level. The group of adventurers that were looking out into the distance here was composed of steel ones and bronze ones. They were quite surprised by the appearance of a man clad in metal. What kind of armor is that? Are those runes? Never mind the armor, what is that thing behind him? Is it a tamed monster? No, it's made of metal. They continued to murmur while the person approached slowly. The armor that the person was wearing didn't look like your everyday plate armor. Even though it was mostly covered by a dark robe, the gauntlets were too shiny for them not to stick out. The helmet was nice and silver, and while the visor slit was separated in two, it had some sort of dark glass implanted. This caused the people to not be able to see the man's eyes and worry about the visibility. It also didn't seem that this helmet had any holes for breathing, which made it look even more uncomfortable to wear. The rest of this armor seemed more streamlined, and the breastplate was somewhat angular at the chest area. The pauldrons were a bit more pronounced, but not enough to the point that they would limit mobility. The thickness of the armor also looked unordinary, which showed that the person wearing it had to have an enhanced strength number. It was clear to the new adventurers here that the person inside of it had to at least be a Tier 2 class holder to be able to move around in that heavy armor. While the armor was interesting due to its size and runes, what drew the eyes was the thing walking behind this armored person. It looked like some kind of barrel with 4 legs. To the side, there was some kind of latch, and it seemed that it could be opened. By the size of the construct, they wouldn't be surprised if a person was riding inside of it. Hey, isn't that just Wayland? You mean the rune smith? Who else would be parading in armor like that? The young adventurers nodded at each other while the person in question could hear them talking. I didn't even make it red this time around. I guess it's not possible to not stand out when wearing something like this. Roland gave out a sigh while walking slowly. The armor that he was wearing was an improved version of his runic armor that was all made from ether metal. It was still mostly deep steel, but he managed to get his hands on some better alloys which would boost the spell casting output of his runes. It was time to head into the dungeon to get his resources. He had planned and waited for the right moment, now it was upon him. While it was something that he was looking forward to, he also realized that his heart was beating faster. At first, he thought that he was pushed into some of these strange situations. The time with the Ant Queen or the run-in with the Dark Elves were some. There was always a safer way of doing things, but he realized that he also didn't like to waste time. If he took it slowly, he would have probably been behind his current level. His stats would be lower and his store might have not even existed yet. He realized that taking risks was just a part of life and running a successful business. Even now, while going down into the dungeon, there was more time than he could take. The store money had slowed down, but he would be able to gather more with time. Waiting and twiddling his thumbs was not something he liked to do. Maybe because in his past life he wasted time on doing things that others forced him to, that now he was unwilling to wait. It was as if he feared that if he stopped for a second that he would lose his stride, and for that he was even willing to put himself in some moderate danger. A growl knocked him back to reality as he spotted Agni looking at some adventurers. They all quickly backed off after the ruby wolf peeked out from behind the chubby walking golem. It's okay, Agni, calm down, they are just curious. Agni snorted with his nose as some of the new adventurers were so curious about this strange party that they approached to take a look. This made Roland think about the talk he had with Bernier not so long ago. Be sure to double-check everything. Sure, boss. You don't need to worry, I'll keep everything safe. You have all the keycards, do you need me to explain them to you? No need, I remember everything. You are worrying too much, boss. Have a great time in the dungeon. About 30 minutes ago Roland was looking at his somewhat older-looking assistant. His beard was a lot longer than before and even had some braids. He did not understand the dwarven culture, and even though his assistant was only half a dwarf, he still loved to tend to this bushy mess. Don't worry, Wayland, I'll keep him in check. A womanly voice called out from the side and he saw a rather tall-looking woman with quite the large protruding chest area. That's reassuring. Diana, one of the other Tier 2 blacksmiths from town, was also here. For some unknown reason, Bernier managed to hit it off with this large woman. She was even taller than Roland was, so he was somewhat surprised that she decided to pair up with Bernier, who wasn't all that tall. Bernier of course reported on his romantic conquests on every occasion that he got. Roland didn't believe most of it. Diana was also clearly the one wearing the pants in this relationship, as he could see his assistant flinch a bit after his girl spoke out. Through the years Roland managed to be less paranoid about the people around him. This was mostly due to his own sweetheart that had grown on him through the years. By going down into the dungeon he needed someone to keep the fort. Elydia had the orphanage to worry about, so that left Bernier. The last time he was left was years ago and produced some dead thieves. Now the area was much better protected, so he was sure that Bernier would be able to handle himself. Diana being here was mostly Bernier's idea and he didn't need to ask why he wanted her here. The two had their own places and they mostly stayed at her workshop for their nightly activities. With him leaving for a few days, it was probably time for his assistant to let loose in his own improved house. The shack that he had lived in was no more, as his carpenter skills were used. The house wasn't as large as Roland's, but the inside was somewhat cozy. There would be enough space for a whole family to live in, and he wasn't sure how he should feel about that being a possibility. Having Diana over here would increase his store's profitability. She was also in the minority of people that he could trust along with Bernier. The large woman constantly complained about how her wares weren't selling that well. The only people that went for the basic non-magical armors were bronze and steel grade adventurers. Getting involved with Wayland Enterprises would probably earn her a lot of money, but he was aware that making such a decision wasn't easy. She would be selling off the store that she worked hard to create. Even though she wouldn't be moving far, it would probably be a hit to her pride as a craftsman if she just gave up. The only other option that was less invasive would be an affiliation. Her store would get his logo and a shipment of runic wares to spice things up. The problem with that would also concern the Dwarven Union. They still had it out for him. Any store that had his wares up for sale would probably invite some trouble that was better avoided. But as time told, he was able to work around that problem with good runic items. Even without the Dwarven help, his name carried weight behind it that the dwarves could not deny anymore. He was the city runesmith, he was the first one, and they would all see him as one. This didn't mean that he would be the only runesmith forever. The city was slowly stabilizing itself, and there were even houses being built outside the old walls. This would be a new district that was supposed to be called a new town, while the old town remained inside. While he didn't think that this expansion would reach his home anytime soon, it was a possibility that he would get actual neighbors here after 10 or so years. The intermediate rank C dungeon was popular enough for this to happen. Even the nobles that ruled the area were slowly starting to show some interest in it. Come here for a second. Roland pulled Bernier over closer while he was looking at his future wife. Listen, you are free to use all facilities, but if I find out that you did something in my own house, then... Roland glanced over towards Agni, who in response showed Bernier his nice chompers while also looking at something between Bernier's legs. No boss, I need those, don't worry, we won't. Fine, have your fun. You too boss, and be sure to bring OL Betsy back in one piece. I'll try. With click to a runic remote, old Betsy sprung to life. This was a heavy golem that was built for transportation. It was something Roland decided to create to replace Bernier, as he didn't want to endanger a good blacksmith like him with more dungeon runs. He wasn't getting any experience from the kills, which slowed down his progress. Instead, they built a mechanical mule to carry around the heavy load. This golem looked like a bulky headless horse with a golem eye at the front. It had a compartment inside with the largest spatial bag that Roland could afford. The plan was to replace this bag with a proper space rune when the time came, but for now, this would have to do. By bringing only this large mule-type golem, he would save on energy. The spatial bag inside of it would be enough to house all the other weapons and provisions that he needed for his new expedition. The batteries that it used were also inside along with a portable charger that he could use his own mana on. If he ever ran out of energy for some reason, he would be able to recharge the golems a couple of times on his own. Did you pack the lunch I made for you? Yes, I've triple-checked everything. Stop looking at me like that, I'll be fine. As he was about to head into the forest, he was then met by Elydia. His woman wasn't happy about him wandering into the dungeon alone. Luckily she was used to the adventurer types, so it wasn't as hard to convince her for this longer expedition. Be careful, if you don't come back in time I'll send a search party for you. Please don't do that, I'll be fine, the monsters in the dungeon aren't anything special. He of course didn't quite come clean about what monster he would be fighting, as he knew that Elydia would be probably against him soloing a unique boss that no one else had met before. I'll be waiting, don't forget to eat. After a little smooch they finally parted ways. He felt bad about his lie, but he didn't want to worry Elydia. Thus now he found himself walking into the dungeon with a lot of eyes on him. Luckily Agni with his increased size and level was enough so scare anyone from coming over and asking stupid questions. The lumbering golem behind him wasn't very fast, but not like he was in a hurry. The stairs caused it to wobble around a bit, but it was not falling down. The runic program that was created for it made it shift its weight to offset the angles so it wouldn't fall over. Even if it got flipped around for some reason, it had an axillary arm to turn itself over. There was also one perk of using this mule golem instead of Bernir as a porter. The monsters would normally not attack this golem unless it moved. When he turned it off they would just see it as a lump of metal with no life. Thus before each battle, he could just press the off switch and place it on the side. No monster would even interact with it as it was an inanimate object to them. But whenever the runs sprung in motion the monsters could feel the mana flowing and would react. Thus for now, Agni was in the rear to keep any monsters from destroying the portable armory that he needed to take out the lurking boss in the lower levels. The weaker monsters fell to Agni's teeth and claws as his tamed beast had profited from Roland's experience gains. After taking some shortcuts they arrived at the 10th level boss area. Luckily it had already been cleared out by some adventurers. While a few years ago there was a good chance to take this boss down with a random party, nowadays a person had to make an appointment with the guild. The boss respawned at a set time after it was defeated and the doors to its room opened. The guild would send out their employees to monitor the room a few hours before the boss would spawn. If a party that didn't buy the privilege to battle this boss appeared, they would be denied entrance. If they decided to ignore the guild worker and fight the boss out of order, they would be fined. Their adventurer cards could even be suspended. This showed how much early adopters had the advantage over the new people that arrived here. Even the new adventurers that came around the same time as he did were able to battle this boss if they wanted. This helped them earn a lot of money, as the boss always dropped a chest and its materials could be sold off for a lot of coins. Even though the golem wasn't the fastest, without having to fear the weak monsters they arrived in the lower levels in just a few hours. At his current level and with the help of the improved runic armor he could just shoot down any enemy and take them out with one shot. Roland's eye sockets glowed as he examined the area. Before him, a bright image of a map appeared with many small red dots. All the dots were moving around slowly, and in his mind, he already saw a nice route where he could evade most of them. Okay, time to get this over with. Chapter 166 Back for the loot. There it is. Roland looked through the small angular eye sockets of his new helmet. While from the outside it looked like they were covered by some dark, barely transparent glass, on the inside it looked different. It was a special material that didn't let light in but was able to produce a clear image from the inside. It was something fashioned out of crystals that were able to sustain some smaller runes. Thanks to this he could use it as a sort of small monitor. The first thing he did was implement his mapping device into this whole armor. Now it really felt like he was in a game, as a minimap was at the corner of his eye. He could make it larger to scan for enemies and the topography of the area. At this moment of time, he was hiding behind a large boulder while looking into the distance. There he saw a large lake of lava and some adventurers standing before it. Even though he had the large mule golem behind him, he went unnoticed as the party was busy fighting off some salamanders. I'll have to wait here until they are gone. Roland clicked his tongue as he hoped that something like this wouldn't happen. He entered the dungeon at a later hour so that when he got to this lower level the other adventurers would be leaving. He couldn't account for longer expeditions as some people did camp out in this dungeon. There were a few spots to rest here. One was the cave the nobles spent some time after arriving, but it was closer to the dungeon exit. Another one was past the lake at the last camping spot the nobles rested. While the dungeon would make people disappear, any appliances they left behind would still be there. If someone abandoned a tent, the dungeon would not be able to absorb it like it absorbed dead bodies of monsters or adventurers. The monsters would also not interact with them unless they could feel some signs of life or magic in them. Thus with time, some areas were built up with flame-resistant structures. Even now some areas were set up for mining purposes, as this dungeon did possess a large pocket of flame-resistant materials. It was of course quickly snatched up by the dwarves that had somewhat of a monopoly when it came to things like mining. He didn't really blame them, as he would have probably done the same. The dwarves couldn't really buy the mining rights to the dungeon, but they could keep people away from the spots that they discovered. Unless someone had a fight to pick with them, they would evade such mining operations that were also well protected by high-level adventurers. The dwarves made sure to circle out mining expeditions on a weekly basis so that no one else could take their spot. They were running several such operations and were paying top coin. With so much work that they were giving the Adventurer Guild, it was normal for them to side with the dwarves if a dispute like his occurred. "You sure like those, don't you, boy?" While waiting, Roland looked over to Agni that was feasting on a dead tier 2 salamander monster. With so many of these around in this dungeon, he didn't really need to feed his tamed beast. Agni even preferred to hunt for his own food instead of receiving some store-bought sausages, as they lacked the mana stones that he was fond of. Thanks to the inbuilt feature of this new armor's helmet, he didn't really need to peek out from behind the boulder. He could see them quickly moving past the dried-up lake as the lava parted to the sides. "Let's go, Agni." Initiate following mode. While glancing at OL Betsy and giving her a voice command, they finally left from behind the large boulder. It didn't seem that anyone was watching him, but he couldn't really be sure. Roland was trying to be somewhat stealthy, but this large mule was somewhat eye-catching. This could very well be the first and last time that he had the opportunity to get those high-quality materials. The first time he was there, the commotion with the nobles was enough to keep everything hidden. Now on the other hand, if someone saw him vanish in the middle of the lake, it would look suspicious. This wasn't something he could control, and for this reason, he decided to take this large mule-type golem along for the expedition. The inside was outfitted not with only one large spatial bag but several smaller ones. The plan was to get as much as he could now and not worry if the Dwarven Union discovered his little secret later. He was just one man, so he didn't require as many materials as those large smithies that the dwarves ran. One good mining expedition was enough to last him for a very long time, for how much he would actually only know after arriving home and unpacking. "Let's go, Agni, we don't have much time." Golem, activate carry mode. The lake was about to split apart once more, and while this was underway the golem started to transform slightly. The legs on the side moved closer towards its body and slid into some hidden compartments to make it smaller. Roland looked to the large golem that was behind him and quickly grabbed it with both his hands. The runes on his armor started glowing as he activated the strengthening buffs that he previously inscribed. It was quite a scene of him lighting the large golem over his head and quickly running through the lake. While the golem could move around, it was nowhere near close to his running speed. He risked getting swallowed up by the lava if he waited for it. It was around here. Roland came to a halt while placing the golem to the side gently. He was now in the middle of the dried-up lake of lava. His debugging skill was activated as he scanned for the entrance. Not far from where he was standing he found it, a set of hidden runes glowing brightly. Without losing any time he moved over to this location, and after a moment of fiddling around he heard a clicking sound. The thick rocky ground that looked impenetrable by normal means started shifting to the side to reveal an opening. Quickly Agni, we need to get down, there shouldn't be any monsters in that area, but be careful. Not wanting to stand out more, he ordered Agni to go down first and see if there was something threatening their descent. While the mystical ruby wolf was going down, he also used his own hands to carry the mule golem with him, as the narrow stairs would have been a problem for it. In its current state and with its legs folded inside, he was able to somewhat squeeze it through the opening that appeared. He would pat himself on the back for being able to remember the size of this opening. If not, this would have probably been quite the short expedition and he would need to make his golem smaller. Woof! No enemies in sight? Good boy, stand watch while I close the opening. With both Roland and Agni inside, it was time to close the door behind them. Even if someone saw them entering this spot, they would find it hard to follow in their footsteps. Without a proper runesmith or a runic mage, it would be impossible to open up the door to this hidden chamber. After the opening above his head was closed, he could finally relax. The moment he descended into the room, a set of torches lit up on the walls. There was nothing in this room besides those torches and a door on the other side. Out of curiosity, he looked down to the ground but could not see any signs of footsteps. It was clear that no one had been here for a very long time. With how the dungeons liked to reset any damage done to them, he didn't expect to see his old footprints being here. Disengage carry mode, enter following mode. Roland felt a bit silly giving the golem commands, but he didn't want to push his armor's programming by adding remote control to the mule golem. His armor was already gem-packed with various runic spells. Just like with any software from the modern world, adding more code could cause the old one to give him errors. Let me see. After the golem moved its legs back out, he opened up a small side compartment. There he found a hand-drawn map that he had fashioned himself. It was a map of this place that he drew up 3 years ago when he was here. The corridors inside were filled with monsters and some were dead ends. While traveling with his brother and Lucille, he had to stop and draw where they had previously been. Without pen and paper, he used the walls or the ground instead. With the help of his good memory, it helped them to get to this area after wandering for some days. Okay, Agni, let's go, stay behind me, and protect the golem. Agni whined a bit while looking at the large door in the distance. Roland smiled a bit as he knew that his wolf just wanted to act as the vanguard to meet the danger instead of his master. While the monsters that led up to the boss weren't super strong, there were a lot of them. With Roland's current strength and improved armor, it would be faster for him to do it instead of his tamed beast. Finally, the real expedition began as he pushed the large door open. This opened up a large corridor that was dimly lit by similar magical torches. While going through the threshold, he heard a strange noise from behind the corner. After scanning the area for monsters, he noticed a red dot slowly approaching him. These monsters sure react fast. A Tier 2 upgraded version of a flaming skeleton was now in his path. The monster had a shield and sword in his hand and fire was coming out of its eye sockets. Without giving the monster much time to charge him, Roland raised his hand. A blast of cold energy was released from his palm and collided with the monster in front. The whole corridor lit up with bright blue light that soon faded. The monster that was previously on fire stood in place while looking like a frozen corpse. With such a big of a level difference, these won't be much of a challenge. Roland slowly moved forward and moved his hand to the frozen skeleton. He relieved the monster of its head just to grab the mana stone that was embedded into its forehead. This mana stone made its way into Agni's mouth as Roland threw it towards him. At this point in time, Roland didn't really care much about these mana stones that he could easily hunt for. The monster inside wouldn't pose much of a threat, not at least till he got closer to the boss chamber. So the slow walk continued. All the monsters that were before him fell to one of his spells without being given a second to react. Even Agni became fed up with all the mana stones that he was given to eat, so the rest was tossed into the mule golem that was lumbering slowly forward. Roland found himself wandering through these halls while holding the map and trying to recall if he was going in the right direction. With his increased level of skill and improved weapons, he soon arrived at the area before the boss's room. Didn't think I'd see one of these here. The monsters that had been in the tunnels had certainly changed, even this one that was keeping him away from the boss chamber was different. Luckily for Roland, who had been farming golems for their cores for years, this would not be a dangerous foe. After some ice blasts here and there, which were then followed by a sledgehammer to the golem's externalities, the monster was down on the ground. It was unable to move and ready to explode like last time, but this time, Roland was ready. He quickly dislodged the golem's core before it blew up and then shoved it into one of the spatial bags for rare items. "This is it, Agni, please watch my back while I prepare." With the boss room before him, Roland was ready to give his monster subjugation drones a spin. Before opening the golem that came with him, he examined the boss room with the help of his mapping feature. Just like before, there were no life signals inside. From what he remembered, the moment the door was opened, some sort of mechanism would be activated. Only then would the boss appear from above, as he was probably waiting in a hidden room. Before going in, he made sure to examine the large doors here. His debugging skill didn't show any side entrances that would let him evade this boss, just like the years before. Thus it was time to get this job done. Roland opened up the latch to his mule golem and reached into the large spatial bag that was in there. From it, he removed a certain spider-like machine that looked very similar to the drone that he was testing before. There wasn't just one, no, there were 6 of them together, and after injecting some mana through his armor, they all sprung up to life. With a small graphical interface in his helmet, he could see some numbers ranging from 1 to 6 appear that corresponded to each spider drone. With everything in order, he slowly approached the door. On his left side, he held a large kite shield that almost reached all the way to the ground. On his right, he had a large war hammer with a spiky tip that would be too heavy for any normal person to wield. The monster inside would be large and ferocious. He did not possess the sword skills of a tier 2 swordsman. Even a runic longsword would find it hard to slash a large monster's hide. The heavy hammer, on the other hand, could be used to pierce through it with ease. This will either take a minute or go horribly wrong. The large door was pushed open, but he didn't enter. Instead, he executed a program that he had prepared beforehand for the drones. After checking the layout of the chamber, he just needed to alter some parameters for the golems to get in the right place. 6 of the drones were the first ones to enter. They hugged the walls right from the start and slowly started to encircle the inside. Roland theorized that unless an actual human entered the chamber, the boss would not be triggered, and he was correct. His drones had enough time to walk to their designated spots and lie in wait. Next came the other large golem that quickly moved to the side and was instantly deactivated. Only then did Roland walk in, as his trap was successfully in place. "Agni, stay by the golem and don't move." Agni, as always, was somewhat unwilling to leave his master alone, but he followed the order and remained next to the mule golem. With slow steps, Roland moved forward while constantly looking up and to the sides as well. Before the boss appeared, a large red dot flashed on his screen. This dot was approaching them quite fast, and soon a familiar-looking monster with a large sword tail descended with a rumble. "Good, it's the same one." Before the bladed dinosaur could release a paralyzing roar, it was instantly hit by a burst of freezing energy. Even without using a runic staff, the frozen blasts that his armor could produce were enough to stop this monster in its tracks. Just as the last time, the monster switched into its enraged state. Lava burst forth from its body and all of the ice instantly melted. This was still all in Roland's plan. While the monster was going through its heating up state, he activated the drones on the sides. The medium-sized spider drones opened up from the front to produce a metallic spike. Their legs dug into the rocks below, and along with a support bolt, they were quite stationary. The spike shot towards the screaming monster. The spike was only the beginning, as a silvery net was attached to it. These stakes shot behind the monster while covering it with nets from 6 directions. This didn't go well with the monster, as it tried to rip the nets apart. Before it could, though, a jolt of electric energy was sent through these combined nets, which caused the monster down to the ground. It was now getting shocked from all sides by the drones that Roland prepared. Even its heated-up body had trouble with melting these specially prepared netting, as they were made from fire-resistant materials. "Open wide." Roland appeared right in front of the monster while blocking his body with the shield. He was right next to the monster's huge maw. The Carnotaurus was not able to let such a chance slide and it tried to devour its enemy. But instead of Roland's head, something else made its way towards this open mouth. It was large, round, and made of metal, and the moment it went down the monster's gullet it activated. Boom! A large explosion rocked this closed-off area and was followed by the system message of Roland receiving experience points. Chapter 167 Time to Mine. The experience pop-up sprung up to signal that the monster had been killed. This was one of the more handy functions of this game-like system this world had. It kept anyone on their toes until this message appeared and made playing dead virtually impossible for any living being in this world. That wasn't that bad. Roland looked at the corpse of the bladed volcanic Carnotaurus that had been blown up from the inside. He decided to implement the old tactic that worked before when he was here with Robert. The monster had a tough exterior that was even able to take a blast of concentrated magical energy. Swords or any kind of bladed weapons would probably bounce off its armored plates if the user didn't have any proper skills. The previous tactic worked before and it was not something that was difficult to reproduce. Thus he decided to implement his spider droids to disable the monster for a moment. The electricity had worked before and the monster did have a large mouth for easy bombing access. He had gambled a bit on this fight as he couldn't be sure if the same exact monster would appear here. The boss chamber on the 10th level was the type to randomize boss encounters, but it wasn't the only type of boss chamber. This one for instance seemed to produce the same exact monster. This one was a level higher than the one that he faced all those years before. It wasn't much stronger though, and the shocking nets that were also made to resist fire had done what they were designed to do. Even if the monster was somewhat different, he expected to be able to utilize the drone nets. With some added earth magic to tangle his opponent's feet, it was a basic plan of stopping his opponent in their tracks. If something went wrong, he would then switch to plan B of using ranged spells from his armor. He had various other weapons stashed in his golem along with a plethora of runic cards for a prolonged battle. Roland was glad that he was able to save up on ammunition as he wasn't sure if these spider drones could be used again. Even without getting close to them, he could see that some were damaged. All units gather up. After giving the command, he waited for the spider drones to detach themselves from the net. The sound of mechanical legs filled the room as only 4 of the 6 golems arrived at the destination. 2 of them remained in place while flailing their limbs in odd directions. It was clear that they had suffered some damage while trying to hold the monster in place. The support bolts held them in place, but some of the joints have been damaged. Roland looked at one of the damaged golems that didn't seem to be able to move. Before walking over to it, he noticed the victory chest with goodies appearing in the middle of the boss chamber. It was just like the last time and he would expect to receive something at tier 2. For now he ignored the treasure box while walking over to the damaged golem. His creation was twitching on the ground while trying to fulfill what it was ordered to do. Without another command to ignore the previous one, it would continue to struggle for about a minute. Then after going through a couple of program loops it would time out and stop. This was a safety feature to save up on the runic battery charge that was left. If he didn't code it right, the magical machine would just continue to struggle until it ran out of power or it fulfilled its command. Just as he had predicted, the spider droid shut down after a while of struggling. Only then he decided to pick it up to examine the extent of the damages. The legs are bent out of shape, joints cracked, the support bolt was mostly ripped out along with the chassis. This one is going to need a lot of repairs. After a quick examination, Roland decided that it would take too much time to fix. There was a limit of how long he could be here. He was not sure if the secret chamber was the same as before, nor if this boss chamber would respawn another sword-tailed dinosaur for him to kill. From what he knew, he should have about a week until a chamber like this respond a foe. This was a well-documented occurrence as most of the boss chambers worked the same between dungeons. A monster like this that was over level 120 would take a minimum of a week to respawn. The time could be random but would not go over 2 weeks. With that in mind, he needed to get back before this monster appeared again. While it might be a good farming spot of treasures from boxes, he could earn more just by mining the precious metals from the secret chamber. Agni, stop! Roland took the damaged golem into one hand and was about to go towards the other damaged one. At that moment he noticed his tamed beast going for the dead monster in the middle. I need that mana stone, Agni, don't eat it. Agni whined a bit while looking at the dead monster core. While the mana stone was not out in the open with his innate mana ability, Agni could sense where it truly was. Don't you give me those eyes, I need that mana stone. Roland shouted from the side while tossing the 2 damaged spider drones into the spatial bag. The other 4 were also deposited there for safekeeping, as for the next part of the dungeon he wouldn't need them. The biggest reason that he didn't want to part with the monster's stone was ether alloys. The metals that he was going to unearth were of high quality. This could be boosted even higher with the right mana stone smelting process. This was a stone from a boss monster, so even if it was only a tier 2 stone, it still was above all the other ones he could find in the dungeon. It would be too much of a loss if he just had Agni eat up all of the best parts for his new creations. After the golems were back in the bag, he commenced the next part of the plan. His hand moved into the spatial bag and he pulled out a strange-looking tool. For people in this world, it looked like some strange long blade with spikes coming out. In reality, it was a runic chainsaw that he had prepared for this very day. The runic chainsaw looked somewhat different from a regular tool from the modern world. The biggest difference was that it had no large motor or space for fuel like its counterparts. Instead, the handle wasn't as chunky as the ones that had to hold fuel in them. This handle was constructed for holding it with both hands so as to not have the tool slip out during the process of cutting. As the cutting started, it would pull the runic saw downward towards the item that was being cut. Roland implemented bumper spikes that were found in regular chainsaws to rest them against what was being cut. Roland ditched the fuel system as he didn't need such a crutch to use this tool. His mana reserves were quite large, thus he could just run it by himself. Previously the monster that was before him had to be left behind as there was no way of carrying the corpse outside. With the help of the runic chainsaw he was going to remedy that problem. It was constructed like any chainsaw. The guide bar was rounder at the end, the chain went around it with the base being used for the chain ring. The inside mechanism that would normally be a motor either run by fuel or electricity could be replaced with runes. With a small jolt from his mana, the chain ring began to slowly spin around. He continued to add more and more mana until he had it going nice and fast. The work thus started. The sound that this runic saw made caused Agni to shrink away and howl at it. Roland wasn't aiming to get everything out of this monster's body. Its large tail that was shaped like a large sword would fetch a good price though. So would its organs like the heart, eyes, and even tongue. These were various ingredients in potions that could fetch a nice price. With the help of his tool, he was able to get through the armored parts with a moderate amount of force. Even though the chain was spinning fast, it still was a sluggish process to get through the monster's tough body. At the end, the chain would probably need to be replaced, but thanks to this construction the rest of the tool would remain intact. This wasn't the main reason that he was here though. He gave himself about half an hour of slicing before walking away. Even though the runic saw worked nicely, it didn't protect people from being splashed with monster blood while cutting. He had thought this far enough and while working used a lesser shield spell to surround his body with a thin layer of mana. This was enough to not be covered in the monster's innards as he cut its limbs apart. To save on time, he decided to make the parts small enough to fit into his mule golem. Thus its tail, head, legs, and claws made their way into the large spatial bag while the middle part was left behind. The only part that was worth it would be the heart and the mana stone, which he also removed. You can go ahead, Agni, that is if you still want to snack on that thing. Roland pointed to the mess that he made. The cut-up corpse of the boss monster still had a lot of meat to it. Agni looked at it for a moment and didn't seem interested after the mana stone was removed. You sure grew into a food critic. Roland chuckled while going towards the leftover chest. He pointed with his finger towards it and a gentle light shot out towards the chest. It started glowing brightly with a few colors switching on the surface. In a few seconds, the colors became uniform and it remained red for the remainder of the spell. Red? Is my great luck at work again? After seeing the color, Roland grabbed the large war hammer that he didn't use for the fight. He quickly raised it up into the air and brought it down on the chest that appeared after the boss was killed. The moment his weapon connected with the treasure box, he could hear a strange wail. The monster's true appearance was revealed to him after it was smashed. This was quite the sneaky monster that was able to disguise itself as parts of the dungeon. Even with his identification skill, he was unable to distinguish it from a normal chest. Only when using a specialized spell to uncover traps was he able to ascertain the monster's true state. This was a very rare occurrence. There was a small chance that the chest that would spawn would be booby-trapped. Then there was an even lower chance that it would spawn in as a mimic. The monster would wait until the person was right next to it before opening up to devour them. It was a very dangerous enemy. Even when poked by swords or pelted with arrows, it remained stationary. It knew how to play the waiting game and would risk taking some hits before attacking. Thus Roland decided to smash it with all his might with this impact hammer that he made. The increased weight on the downward swing was strong enough to take the being out with one hit. The message of receiving experience points came soon after, and what remained was a chest with a huge tongue that was flopping out and massive teeth everywhere. Agni jumped over the moment he realized that there was a monster there. The growling soon stopped though and was replaced by interest. No, you can't have this either. What was left behind by the monster was another mana stone. Mimics were shapeshifters, so their mana stones were somewhat larger than from other monsters that were at their level. Thus it would be a shame if his gluttonous wolf devoured this one as well. You can have the rest if you want though. After placing his hand in the strange-looking creature, Roland pulled out a nice shiny gem. It was covered in some mucus, but with some mana, he was able to burn it away from his gauntlets. Agni just snorted at the dead creature as if he wasn't pleased with what his owner proposed. With the chest out of the way and the monster parts inside the mule golem, they both departed for the more important part of the expedition. Like before, there was a secret passage leading out of this chamber. Behind it would be the maze section with some traps that could be easily avoided by him. The golem that was slowly walking behind him was just small enough to fit through the narrowest of the corridors here. Roland was sure to design him in such a way that he could fit through. At this point in time, even if it did get stuck, he would continue with the mining run. The golem would just be left closer to the boss room while he took the backpack himself, but it would limit his gains. This was the easiest part of the journey as no monsters roamed these corridors. The only thing he needed to watch out for were magical traps. One of the more annoying parts was getting Agni and the golem over the runic tiles that were trapped. He found himself placing Agni on top of the golem and lifting it over his head while walking through this long corridor. While Agni had some skills to recognize traps, he didn't want to risk his wolf tripping one of them along the way. After this part, it was smooth sailing and he arrived next to the secret entrance to the mine. I'm picking up some life signals. Get ready, Agni, there will be enemies inside. Thanks to his built-in mapping feature, he was able to scan the inside of the cavern. A couple of red dots appeared here and there, but this wasn't anything that he wasn't expecting. The moment the secret door was opened, he and Agni rushed inside while leaving the golem back. Inside he discovered a couple of volcanic salamanders and red slug monsters that were giving out smoke. They were all low-level creatures compared to him and Agni. At the bottom of Tier 2, they stood no chance against Roland's magical spells that he was able to spam without any incantation. Even before Agni could sink his teeth into one of the salamanders, it was frozen in place by Roland's modified frozen arrow spell. He was able to combine a few features of other spells like a homing arrow. With it in place, the spell would chase after the monster's mana signature and react mid-flight. This saved him time on aiming, as he could just spray the spells in the enemy's general direction. It was more of a massacre than a fight, as all the monsters that were here dropped dead within a couple of moments. With how they were all regular mobs, Roland gave Agni a nod and the hungry wolf chowed down on the salamander flesh and mana stones. Good, it's all still here. The moment he entered, he could already see the various colorful lights shining around them. There were various minerals radiating mana from them and other shiny metals stuck in the ground and ready for the taking. Agni, you are on guard duty. If any more of those monsters appear, be sure to take care of them. The ruby wolf perked up at the order and stopped eating the raw salamander. He was quick to finish eating and then started slowly moving around the chamber while looking for foes. Roland on the other hand signaled the golem to move into the room. From inside of it he removed the 4 working spider droids along with 2 other ones that he had saved up for this occasion. With some fiddling, the golems were now equipped with something that looked like a drill on their fronts. It's time to work, spread out, initiate routine 11B. While the smaller golems activated, he removed a nice-looking pickaxe from the storage as well. It was time to give his mining skills a try. Chapter 168 Metals everywhere. The sound of drilling along with metal colliding with rock filled the mostly empty cavern. To the side, a rather bored mystical ruby wolf was munching on some volcanic salamander meat while looking at its master swinging a shiny pickaxe. This was something that had been going on for quite some time. Roland did not sleep nor did he stop swinging his mining tool while collecting various of the costly minerals. There was no time to lose. He had no idea if he would be discovered or if someone would be waiting for him at the exit. While he didn't think that he was spotted, he could not be sure. People with heightened senses and abilities that even his new mapping system couldn't detect were always a possibility. It wouldn't be hard for people to camp out near the lake and wait for his return. This was still not a very probable outcome. Unless someone was certain that there was money to be gained, they wouldn't go through with such a scheme. At most, they would post a lookout to trail him back home. Then they would decide if it was worth the trouble to attack the city runesmith. Even though the dwarves had continued to mess around with him, he could not be easily countered. They too had limited means of combating his runic wares that he could produce at a fast pace. Compared to regular runesmith, his runes were always masterfully crafted. Even if another smith of the runes appeared in the city, they would find it hard to compete with Roland when it came to crafting these magical symbols. Phew, I've gotten some nice loot this time around. Finally, after working for multiple hours, Roland decided to put his pickaxe down. After going through this cavern a couple of times, he had a good idea of what he was working with. The most prevalent ore that he found here was durium. Durium from the outside looked similar to iron ore, but it had a characteristic dark blue sheen to it. It was much stronger than iron, but this durability came at the cost of being somewhat brittle. Thus, after some research, the people found a few ways to combine this extremely hard metal with other alloys and finally produced durasteel. Durasteel was mostly a combination of deep steel and durium with a sprinkle of other minerals. It could also be further refined into ether durasteel, which would produce items that even platinum-grade adventurers would not be ashamed to use. This would probably be the next step in his life as a runesmith. He would finally be able to shift his focus away from deep steel weapons and armor. The amount of ore he was getting here would be enough to get him started. The first move would be to improve all of his tools, smelter, and forge into the better durasteel variant. With it in place, he would actually be able to handle the other rare metals that he was also finding here. One of them was mithril. He didn't find regular mithril in these caverns. Instead, it was a fire-resistant variant that instead of a silvery coloring was quite crimson. Most miners referred to this ore as volcanic mithril due to how it was only found in places where there was lava. This metal was even more resistant than durasteel and didn't need to be mixed with other minerals. Most Tier 3 class holders came in contact with this fantasy metal, and weapons made from them were a show of status among those circles. It was one of the more prevalent high-quality metals in this world. There were only 2 others, orichalcum and then adamantium, which was considered the strongest of them all. Both of them were even rarer and would rarely see the light of day. Adamantium in particular was considered practically indestructible. There were some books on it that described quite the complex process of even working with this metal. A craftsman would at least have to have a set of orichalcum tools to put a dent in adamantium. Even with them, the heat that was required to make this metal workable reportedly caused the deaths of some of the craftsmen that attempted to mold it. The craftsman would need to be of an extremely high level. They would also need to have all of their fire resistance skills leveled up to the highest degree. From what the records say, Roland imagined the craftsmen being almost forced to be inside of a smoldering inferno themselves. Then even if such an adamantium weapon or armor was made, the process of enchanting it or putting runes would be even harder. He wasn't sure that even a Tier 3 runesmith would be up to this task. A Tier 4 class holder was more realistic. The third metal that he was able to find again was Ethereum. There were some sizable chunks that were ready to be unearthed, and this would probably increase the value of his wares by quite a bit. Ethereum was a metal that was used by grand magicians for magic tower cores. They would store massive amounts of magical energy within them without suffering from any deterioration factors. With the help of this mineral, he could produce runic weapons that would stand the test of time. By adding a bit of Ethereum into the Durasteel mixture, he would be able to boost its enchanting capabilities many times over. In itself, Durasteel wasn't much better than regular deep steel when it came to runic deterioration. But when combined with some Ethereum, it would reach its true potential and be something quite close to actual mithril. Roland smirked a bit as he continued to think about the possibilities of using all these metals. Thanks to the dwarves, he was unable to procure such metals. He was also short on funds as the black market merchants were unwilling to go below market value. He knew what they were doing. The ores that they were selling were clearly stolen through various means. Either by open robbery or just by some greedy miners that sold some on the side. Such materials would always be sold for much less than they would normally be worth on the market. Thus they should have gone for at least a bit less on the black market. But for him, the black market was the only option now, and the greedy merchants knew it. Now on the other hand, with all this he was mining here, he might be able to pull in some merchants. Though the Dwarven Union was powerful, there were still merchants that didn't see them as much of a threat. If he managed to produce high-quality runic Durasteel wares, he would finally have something to bargain with. Golems, runic weapons, and even magical scrolls. His portfolio was finally coming together, and he reckoned that some of the more risk-taking merchants would finally be willing to do business with him. While the auction house in Albrook had been ignoring him, it wasn't the same for other cities. He just needed to strike a deal with someone that would be willing to transport the Durasteel wares out of the city. Other larger auction houses were unfazed by the dwarves, in which he would be able to sell even if he was blacklisted in other places. If the profits are high enough, I could even go there myself. It would probably save me some money. Then there was option 2, to just organize a little trip outside the city. There were larger gatherings of adventurers closer to the large super dungeon. Their gold-ranked adventures and ones above them weren't that rare. Roland had been cooped up in this city for a few years now. This was mostly due to his paranoia of being robbed or attacked by cult members that he once faced. Now on the other hand, his store was well protected. Thanks to Lobelia and her friends, he had access to the Thieves' Guild. With them around, he would not have to worry about getting robbed when he was gone. The Dwarven Union had also not sent any assassins after him as he had previously feared. They really did most of their dealings through business. There was a limit to what they would do, and killing was clearly off the table. If they couldn't buy him out or price his store out of existence, they would let it be. Roland could even imagine the little buggers coming over to strike a deal if he ever got wealthy enough. That is, if they could ever look past him being a human runesmith. These Eloquence crystals will also fetch a nice price. The second mineral that was quite prevalent here was the crystallized form of Eloquence fluid. It was quite similar to oil from the modern world that he came from. It would fetch a nice price on the market, and thanks to his batteries he didn't really need it to power his golemic creations. While his mind was filled with the new products he would be able to create with his new stash, he looked to one of his spider droids. The little guys were drilling around some parts of the ground to loosen up the ores there. The golems that he made were still only basic products that he hoped to improve. Even though they had the same mapping feature that he had, it was hard to implement the analyzing skill into their programming. Without it there, it was hard for them to distinguish between what they were looking at. The only way to go around it was to give them spells similar to the one he used on the mimic chest. He could somewhat help them to distinguish between normal rocks and actual minerals. With the help of the drill attachments, he could somewhat speed up the excavation process. While the golems were there, he used his armor to fully scan the whole area. After getting back home he would use this data to improve upon the spider drones. He hoped that after improving their systems they would be able to fully distinguish between the best parts and focus on them, as now they were just randomly digging around some ores. I should get back to work. After the little break was over, Roland resumed with the digging. While he could have manufactured a large drill for himself, with the armor on and his increased strength he didn't really need to. With heavy swings and a steady hand, he was already working like a machine. What's with this wall? While somewhat spacing out and going through the motions, his pickaxe went into a part of the wall he was working on with too much ease. It was somewhat surprising as it felt that he had punctured through it. When looking at his projected map he couldn't see anything past this part, no hidden tunnels or other caverns. The only two places leading out of this place were the one that he came through and the tunnel he entered together with Robert 3 years ago. This wall, it has a strange sound to it. He started tapping the rocks and noticed that there was something off. From the sounds he was getting, it felt like there was space behind it, but his measuring devices told him otherwise. Curious about what was going on, he decided to pick up the pace and focus on this part. With a couple of swings, he was actually able to pierce his way through this section of the stone wall. The hole that he dug up was about the size of his head, and the first thing that he noticed was some light. There on the inside, he spotted strange glowing crystals that were illuminating the space he was seeing now. What is this? Another secret room inside of a secret room. This would be the third secret room in this section of the dungeon now. His interest peaked as this meant that there was another way to get into this room with all these resources. Maybe on the other side of this wall, there was some passage that led all the way to the large dungeon level. Strange, still can't see anything on the map. Roland glanced at the glowing stones that were in a couple of places. They were quite bright, like light bulbs in crystal form. It was a peculiar sight, as he didn't remember seeing such bright glowing crystals in any other parts of the dungeon. Even in the part he was in, the glow was mostly due to the crystallized mana fluid giving of mana. The walls were also somewhat strange, they didn't seem to fit with the inside of the cave he was in. The color of the rocks on the walls and ceiling was somewhat different. Then he glanced on the ground to spot another oddity. The ground actually had smooth tiles. This is clearly another room, but Roland was somewhat confused by the look of this secret corridor. He had been through many others like it, but the ones in this dungeon kept the color scheme. They were all somewhat in the theme of this dungeon, while this one looked like it didn't belong here. Then there was the strange occurrence where he could not see this place showing up on his map. If he didn't vigorously swing his heavy pickaxe around, he would have never discovered this secret spot. While his brain was telling him to create a larger hole and investigate, his instincts told him to be careful before going inside this new area. The strange lights, the way that his sensors weren't picking up what was behind this wall, it all made him hesitate to just go inside. Then he heard a strange sound. It sounded like something was rattling around while getting closer. He still had limited visibility through the hole that he created, but being curious he remained in place to look at what was coming. In the distance, he noticed a shadow of something. It had a somewhat humanoid shape and was slowly moving in the distance. It seemed that this corridor went into a sharp corner from where those sounds were coming. He already realized that it was probably some kind of monster. With that in mind, he placed his pickaxe to the side. Even if it noticed him, he would be able to reach into the hole with his hand to cast a few spells. What interested him more was what kind of monster would pop out. His first thought would be a more advanced version of a flaming skeleton, probably a tier 2 skeleton soldier or something close. He was right to assume that the humanoid creature would be of the skeletal variety due to the bone-rattling sound. The fact that it was a tier 3 monster was something that he didn't expect. The monster was a lot bigger than the flaming skeletons or the soldier types that he saw around in this dungeon. It was even larger than he was and was clad in a set of heavy armor. It was missing the boots for some reason, which caused it to sound like a skeletal soldier instead. Its head was a constant inferno that produced flames that were almost reaching all up into the ceiling. In one hand it was holding a shield while in the other was a sword clad in flames. Before Roland could take a closer look at this armor it was wearing, it turned to face him. The sight of the monster looking his way caused Roland to quickly duck to the side. While he had gained some levels in the past few years, he was not close to battling a tier 3 monster. Shit, did it see me? He had spaced out for a moment and made a blunder. If the monster saw him, it would probably try to chase him down. Would he last the onslaught of a proper tier 3 being? Probably not. He needed to act fast and quickly remove himself from this area before the skeleton got to him. Agni reacted quickly as it felt the distress that his owner was feeling. Both of them made some space between themselves and the hole in the wall. Roland now had a decision to make: should he abandon this area and hide in the secret corridor, or should he fight the monster that could burst through that wall any minute? His and Agni's safety was more important, so he started to quickly back away towards the secret area, but before going in he noticed that something was wrong. Even though the monster saw him for a fraction of a second, it didn't seem that interested. Normally he would hear a bone-chilling scream before the enemy attacked. They didn't hide their animosity for this long. The corridor also wasn't that long, the skeleton should have been able to close the gap in a couple of seconds. But nothing happened. It was as if the monster ignored him for some reason. For safety, Roland decided to wait a bit more while being close to the secret exit. After about 5 minutes of waiting he could only scratch his head. But, after going through a couple of scenarios in his mind, he came to a conclusion. Wait, could it really be that? His mind was flooded with more questions as he started to realize something. If what he was thinking was actually true, then what was behind that hole was a lot more precious than this chamber filled with costly minerals. Chapter 169 Interesting Discovery. It really isn't reacting. Roland mumbled to himself while looking through the hole in the wall that he made. On the other end, he could see a flaming skull looking his way. Soon this skeletal monster turned away as if it couldn't see the human looking at it, and then vanished back behind the corner. He remained in place while looking at the shadows in the distance. This was not the only monster wandering this place. Other various sounds were heard from this direction, and he even saw another skeletal enemy that was considered much more troublesome than even a champion. While a skeleton champion was a tough foe, the magic counterparts were a lot more troublesome. They could summon many lower-leveled skeletons without end to help them in their fight. Then while their small battalion of skeletons kept their enemies busy, they would sling damaging spells from safety. That one didn't react either, now I'm sure. The undead-type monsters were considered mostly just magically animated corpses that saw the world differently. They were quite sensitive to life and magical energy. If something like a lich couldn't see him when he was standing there, then there was only one explanation of what this was. An entrance to another separate dungeon. This was a rarely seen phenomenon when two separate dungeons that had their own cores collided with each other. During his studies, Roland came across a book that described a few instances where this happened. This supported the theory that the dungeons were divided into zones through which the monsters inside couldn't pass through. Just like in this situation where the monster ignored the human on the other side even when being stared at directly. The missing corridor on his minimap could be explained by the two dungeons interacting with each other. He theorized that the two subspaces collided with each other and might have been causing his detection devices to be erroneous. What the monster here saw wasn't the hole in the wall, it was just a wall. The skeleton and the lich could not see past the border of their own dungeon. Unless Roland moved through the hole, they would not react. He thought about throwing a rock at the monster for another test, but gave up as he didn't want to push his luck too much. The small opening that he made would also mend itself back after some time. The dungeons seemed to have some pre-programmed venues and would repair the broken down walls with time. This was why mining them was such a lucrative business. The tough part was just finding a room like this where the treasures were exposed. I'm not sure if I'm the luckiest man alive or the unluckiest one. Roland gave out a sigh while moving away from the dungeon entrance that he discovered. His drones were back at work and drilling into the ground, as even with this discovery, he still intended to stick to the old plan. There were too many variables for him to just enter the new dungeon, plus the two monsters that he saw in there were far more dangerous than the lone boss that he faced before. While he could profit immensely from this discovery, it could ruin him if the wrong people found out about this place. The room filled with precious metals was already a massive risk, but now he found a doorway into a higher-ranked dungeon. If he decided to sell this information to the Adventurers Guild or the Thieves Guild, he could probably earn a small mountain of gold. The earnings of the guild would increase dramatically through the Tier 3 monsters and treasures that were probably within that dungeon. That would probably be the smartest thing to do, as withholding information like this was considered against the law. The commoners didn't have permission to enter the dungeons before the Adventure Guild officially opened them up. Most of the time, the first dungeon clears would bring in higher rewards and some costly treasures would never be seen again. Thousands of golden coins and high-quality materials were on the line here. If someone discovered that he was in possession of such information, they would do anything to make him cough it up. Even though he knew the danger, Roland thought that he should withhold this discovery for now. What he would gain for the information didn't outweigh what he could profit from this in the long run. He was looking at a gold mine of experience, one that he was the only one aware of. He knew that if he went to the Adventurer Guild, they would take over this place. No one would be able to go inside without the proper papers, this including him. At this point in time, he was still only a silver rank adventurer, as he never bothered to go through with his gold rank test. This one wasn't as easy as the little battle with Armand. To pass it, he would need to go to the guild again. First, they would reevaluate his levels with another measuring device. It would be impossible for him to use his old tactic of hiding his class as he did before. The gold adventurers dipped into the elites, which made the tests more precise. He would need to at least reveal that he had the Runesmith Lord class during the examination. Then if he passed, the guild would send him out into another guild to pass the test. This was a somewhat strange tradition of sending adventurers to other cities on long journeys. They would be given some standard gold rank quests to fulfill along with a time limit. Most of the time a worker from the guild would be assigned to the party and travel with them like a shadow. He would remain hidden during their tests and grade their performance from a distance. This role was mostly given to other adventurers that were over the golden rank or retired ones that worked at the guild. Some magical items were given to these testers to keep them from harm. These guild members would not be held accountable if the person taking the test died. Their job was to watch from afar and grade their performance. If they got themselves into trouble that they could not handle, then it was their fault. He was a busy man, there was no time to go on long journeys to other cities. At least not while his business was expanding at a fast rate. Adventuring was just a means to an end for him to get his shop running. His true skills remained in crafting and runes. That didn't mean that he wasn't interested in a deep down this rabbit hole here. His levels have been stagnating lately. The only good experience that he received was from monsters over his level like the boss he faced, or by making complicated Tier 3 rune schematics. After creating a runic spider drone like this, he would gain a lot, but it was only for the first one. When creating copies or ones that only had small changes, his experience would decrease dramatically. This was also the reason why craftsmen initially leveled up fast, but with the years they started to stagnate if they didn't innovate. This was unexpected. What should I do now? Roland looked at Agni, who was somewhat interested in the hole in the wall. After going through a few things through his head, he decided to perform a little test before covering up the hole. Without having good means to go against the monsters inside, it was better to return home and come up with a plan of action first. The resources that he was gathering would allow him to increase his power. He would also need to research the best ways of combating undead beings like a lich, without the use of divine spells that priests used. They were a troublesome bunch as they didn't feel any pain and had unlimited stamina. A normal monster would still react or back away when sustaining some damage. These bony adversaries, on the other hand, would chase after their opponent even if they had to hop on one leg. Normally they could be burned to ash by magic, but he was facing the volcanic undead. Without a Tier 3 freeze spell, he feared that he wouldn't be able to put them on ice as easily as their Tier 2 counterparts. With that in mind, he decided to see if he could map out the area behind the hole. For this small expedition, he would need to sacrifice one of his spider drones. After signaling one of them to come over, he went down to remove a couple of the attachments. The drone would not need the drill or the net that he used for the boss chamber. It was best to take out what he could use later, as he didn't expect for his creation to come back. Instead, he inserted a backup mapping device that still looked like an iron ball into the drone. After connecting it to the main runic program, he hoped to boost the drone's sensors. OK, drone number 3, initiate manual override. The drone's golem eye gave out a weak signal before its many spider legs moved into the default standing position. In this manual mode, he could pilot his golem like a remote-controlled toy car. He had actually gone ahead and created a little game-like controller. It was almost identical to the ones that he used back in his modern world. He had done it mostly out of curiosity, but also as a product that he might be able to sell to nobles. They would probably fork up a large sum of gold for toys, and he reckoned that controlling a golem with a controller was more interesting than giving it voiced orders. After fiddling with the golem cores and getting more knowledge about the golemic eyes, he was also able to produce a crude image. The resolution was quite low, but he was able to get a somewhat low-res depiction of what the golem was looking at. With more time, he expected to refine this technology to align more with the modern-time high-definition cameras. There was also the main issue of him not being able to view the image in real time. He was able to receive the signal, but it took a while for his runic system to render the scene. Then he also needed to use a special device that was sitting back at his home to view it. With his current armor, he could at most bring up the holographic map that showed him the basic shapes. Now it was time to check the insides of the other dungeon out. The droid was placed by him directly inside of this hole only after he was sure that there weren't any monsters around. Only then did he step away and implement his controller. The droid sprung to life and moved forward slowly. Its legs had special runes that allowed it to attract itself to the ground it was walking on. Thus he decided to cling to the ceiling for now. The map is working now. As the small golem wandered through the threshold of the other dungeon, the mapping feature was restored and he could see further in. There he saw many long corridors that went on for a bit and something that looked like a larger area. The range of his map was somewhat limited, but it was enough to show him the general layout. Isn't the super dungeon a maze type with many levels? From what Roland knew, that main dungeon on this large island was considered a maze. It was composed of many corridors that varied in size. While it was mostly a volcanic dungeon, there were large areas that were different from the rest. Wide open ones like in this Audiobook dungeon, and some even reported large bodies of water that were deep underground. Audiobook wasn't the only city that had a lesser dungeon like the one he was in. But considering that there weren't any other dungeons in the vicinity, the most logical explanation was that this was the super dungeon. In some reports that he read, the researchers stated that the super dungeon could very well have already spread through the whole island they were living in. Finding this opening could confirm some of the claims, as Audiobook was somewhat far away from the main large volcano in the middle of these lands. It was still not that close to the sea, which could mean that the super dungeon still had some place to grow. Looks good, but without the feed from the main golem I won't really know what is in there. The minimap didn't really say much, as the whole place looked like one of the dungeon levels above. What lay waiting on the inside was unknown. He could only order the droid to move closer to that larger room. Soon it disappeared behind the corner to where the skeleton champion wandered towards. His luck was good that day, as he didn't see any red dots on the map. Without being given a clear image of what he was doing, he could only look at lines of code that the golem was giving him. There was information about what it was seeing there, but it would be extremely hard to use it to formulate a good tactic. He started feeling like a certain hero from a movie that he watched that spent some time looking at green code. It wasn't as easy as they made it out to be, as he could barely decipher if something was in the way of the droid he was staring at. The small golem's journey continued as Roland increased the pace by dropping down to the ground. With no enemies on the map, it seemed like the better choice than wandering on the ceiling and bumping into stalactites. But then, as he was about to go around the last corner, a red dot flashed for a moment on the screen. The signal went dead almost instantly as that dot appeared, and it was clear that the golem went down in one shot. Shit, what was that? Roland clicked his tongue as the golem was just about to walk into the large chamber. He wanted to at least see what was in there. Instead, his creation was destroyed by some unknown entity inside that could have been any of the undead creatures that he saw previously. There was also a surprisingly loud sound following the destruction of the spider droid. It didn't sound like anything that he was familiar with but probably belonged to some kind of strange monster. Without any reason to keep this hole open, he decided to plug it up for now. The wall would mend itself back to its original state, but he still didn't want to see Tier 3 monsters wandering on the other side. Roland soon got back to work. With the loss of one droid he would be able to get as many materials, but that didn't bother him in the least. There was enough here to last him for a while. When he returned, a new plan would unfold. One that would allow him to level up a lot faster than someone should be able to. There were monsters that were a whole tier above him. Managing to kill one of them would allow him to gain a massive amount of experience. With them being stuck in another dungeon, his escape route was assured. He could just waltz in, throw a few spells and quickly duck back into this cave if something went wrong. This was something that he intended to use to further his strength even more. Before that he needed to improve his gear so that he was actually able to damage a tier 3 foe. Thus he increased his pace, his heart rate shot up and he felt something that wasn't usually there, a pinch of excitement. Chapter 170 Minor Annoyance. That will be enough. Roland slung a large sledgehammer over his shoulder that he used to break up some rocks. After spending a few days in this cavern filled with precious metals, his mining skill actually got some use and leveled up several-fold. Having a crafting class allowed people to gain some gathering skills to a certain degree. The mining skill would allow him to spot weak spots in some of the rocks. It would also somewhat make his hits penetrate into the rocks. This, in turn, caused the rocks to shatter easier. While he already had the basic mining skill, this was the first time that it was properly leveled up. It seemed that when using better quality tools and mining rare materials it was leveling faster than usual. After spending 4 days in this cavern he had managed to fill the golem up to the brim. This was not due to him managing to gain so many metals and minerals. It was mostly because he had to cut around the ores, which increased the chunk sizes. This meant that most of the items that he had mined were just simple rocks that would need to be properly treated. Luckily he had a proper assistant that could take care of such things, and his wife was also a bonus worker that he was slowly opening up to. Roland's shop had grown through the years. There were even situations of people walking up to him to ask for a job, though most of those quickly disappeared after hearing that the Dwarven Union was still not being favorable to him. The spider bots didn't have much space to cram inside, but they would need to somehow get through this ride along with the tons of rocks and monster parts inside the large spatial bag. There were still some leftover resources as they went deep into the ground. Awoo! Yes, Agni, we are leaving now. Agni started jumping around in joy the moment he noticed that Roland was slowly packing up the spider golems. The cavern was somewhat uninteresting to the tamed beast. Only one more monster wandered into it through the lava pit, which caused Agni to be bored through most of this mining expedition. Before leaving, Roland glanced over at the spot in the cavern that led into the other dungeon. While the metals would allow him to create better gear, his levels would still continue to increase slowly. Now on the other hand he saw a chance to fix that problem. He just needed to make some preparations before coming here again. Then maxing out his current Lord class in one dungeon run wouldn't be that far-fetched. With more hopes in his mind, he left this mining area and headed towards the boss chamber that he cleared out previously. The map didn't show any monster inside, but this didn't mean that it would not appear. He also knew that unless he opened the closed entrance door, the boss fight would not trigger. Thus for the time being he could relax while approaching the exit. Luck was on his side as the large boss chamber doors were wide open. This was a telltale sign that the boss monster did not respawn yet. This was not the same for the monsters in front of the chamber, as he spotted some strange-looking flaming mantis monsters there. There were 2 of them just standing there while looking around. Roland knew that he could come closer and that they would not attack him. This was something of a rule in the dungeons as well. For some reason the boss chambers could not be entered by any monster from the outside. Thanks to this strange rule, he was now able to pelt these monsters with spells while they could not attack him. They went down rather quickly, as at this point Roland's stats were already something that a high-level gold adventurer would have problems with. Any monster below the 100th level did not stand a chance. With a couple of concentrated ice arrows, they were out of commission. Roland continued through the corridors as he did before, but this time around Agni could aid him against the monsters here. Even though Roland was over-leveled for this section of the dungeon, he still needed to be careful. There were many hidden areas where he could be ambushed by monsters, some traps here and there. The only reason he was able to progress fast was thanks to his inbuilt map, through which he could see most of the hidden enemies. It showed him how much more good information was important as opposed to pure battling strength. Not far from home now, Agni, let us take a small break, there are people above us. After about a day of walking, he arrived at the larger area with the exit section. He used more mana to widen his scanning range, and thus he discovered some dots above. These were clearly people going through the Laval Lake. Woof! They both sat down on the ground while the mule golem slowly lumbered behind him. If Roland popped up now, the adventurers outside would surely discover him. His suit also came equipped with a working timer, so he knew the best time to make a run for it. Even though the dungeon didn't have a day and night cycle, people still adhered to it. The best moment to make his move would still be at about 1 AM when everyone was already asleep. The adventurers that stayed here slept at this time too and camped out at a few well-known spots that were far away from this lava lake. Without anything around him that he could fear, Roland decided to remove his helmet. This new one had specialized latches and magnetic runes that would make it very hard to remove. Even if someone damaged the latch, the magnets would still make it stick to his head. After that one time where he revealed his face to his brother, he was not willing to make the same blunder. Years had passed since, and after establishing himself in the city of Albrook, he started to feel more content in his own skin. The only real reason keeping him from seeking out his family was the perpetrator behind the assassination attempt. But this could have also been a false flag that he had forced himself into believing. The air inside of this cave was not the best, hot with a smudge of sulfur. His helmet possessed a filtering feature that he could expand to a smaller area if he gave it some more mana. Roland looked somewhat tired after spending almost a week down in this dungeon. His eyes were also somewhat strained. Even though the sleeping resistance made him less sleepy, it only elevated the symptoms of being sleep deprived. The longer he stayed like this, the worse he would feel. While sitting and waiting, he took out a canister with some water to drink and a bit of dried jerky. It was bearable to eat this, but ever since Elidia showed up and gave him proper meals, he was unsatisfied with these rations. He wasn't sure what it was, but the closer he got to his home, the more he thought about the girl working in the store instead. There was a lot of crafting to do, more weapons to build and more gold to be earned. But for some reason, spending time with that woman felt like the bigger prize here. Maybe I've just gotten old. Roland smiled weakly while looking to Agni, who raised his ears at the statement. Even though he looked like a 20-year-old young man, he would be past 40 if he counted the years from his old world. Normally a person at his age would already be married and have a few kids. This was not something that he was against, but it wasn't a realistic option for Roland here. At least not in the past. Now, after a long period of peace, he wasn't sure if settling down was off the table anymore. I wonder if OL Pops would blow a gasket if he knew that one of his noble sons was together with a commoner. He wasn't sure what his father would do. Getting together with women that weren't of noble descent wasn't totally out of the picture. The only real rule was for the first wife to be a proper noble. No one really cared if the rest were concubines if an heir was already here. This was the same for his family. The first wife was a daughter of a noble house, while the second had been from a merchant that was more in line with the commoner heritage. The third wife was a mystery though. Was she also a noble or some wench that he picked up along on the military expeditions? When he was in the Arden estate, he tried gathering some information, but he couldn't find any about his mother's identity. It was as if the Baron made sure that no one would figure out who she really was. There were no records of her lineage or any paintings left behind, just words and rumors that pointed to her being a commoner. If that was the truth, was anyone's guess. Time started passing while he tried to focus on more productive things like thinking about improving the golem design. Many ideas floated about, mostly ones with a larger design that with the current resources would finally be possible. Agni, get ready. The ruby wolf perked up as Roland finally stood up from his spot. It was past 1 a.m. at night and there hadn't been any movement above for quite some time. Finally, the moment of truth came as he grabbed the larger golem to make a run for it. With his helmet back on, Roland could scan the area for heat signatures. With it, he was able to exit at the right time when the lava lake cleared out. Just like before, he grabbed the slow-moving mule golem and made a run for it. The only difference was that he instantly closed the entrance behind him. With the new armor allowing him to run faster than before, he was able to get to the shore even before the lake started closing. After leaving the golem down on the ground, he continued to look around. Do you see anyone, Agni? Without spotting any dots on his map, he turned to Agni, who had a tracking skill. The wolf started sniffing at the air for any current close-by smells. While he was able to pick up the scents of many people, there didn't seem that there was anyone in the vicinity. Awoo! Agni gave out a howl before snorting with his nose as always to indicate the fact that he couldn't spot anything. Good, let's go, be vigilant, we aren't out of the dungeon yet. Even though Roland was out of the mining area without being spotted, it was not the time to relax. At any moment a monster could poke its ugly head out, or a band of adventurer bandits could try to rob him blind. This also seemed to be the case on this fateful day. When Roland left the area with the lava lake, he came across some people. They didn't go unnoticed by him thanks to his radar, but from the locations they were occupying, it looked like they were up to something. There were 5 of them in total, 2 of them were blocking the path that he needed to take to leave the lower region of the dungeon. 3 others were on high ground and probably armed with ranged weapons. Something like this wasn't out of the ordinary. Some adventurers belonged to the Thieves' Guild and from time to time would go to the dungeon to perform some bandit work. In a place like this, any crime could be attributed to the monsters living here. Any core would vanish or could be tossed into lava if the perpetrators wanted to be sure. Normally a person would try to go around such an obvious trap. Roland wasn't a normal person though, and this radar of his had another handy built-in feature. It could somewhat measure the levels of the people within range. Thanks to this, he knew that the people there were far below him when it came to strength. There were 3 options for him here. First, he could just backtrack a bit and wait for them to go away. The second option would be to take a roundabout way to the exit that would increase the travel time by an hour or 2. Then the last option was to go forward and just fight them. Agni, we have a couple of idiots waiting for us, be sure not to get hit by any of the arrows. Agni gave out a growl as he had also realized that there was someone waiting there behind the corner. Roland's actions might have looked foolhardy to other people, but he calculated the risks taken here. From his point of view, these bandits would not fare any better than any monsters that he could meet at this dungeon. Halt! Don't take another step! The enemies shouted at him the moment he entered their trap. One of the 3 that was previously on higher elevation jumped down to cut off his escape route. Though when he discovered a large mystical ruby wolf there, he jumped back in fright. Are you sure you aren't over your head? Shut up and give us all your money, and leave that thing behind. The person that seemed to be the leader was a large brutish-looking man with more body hair than hair on his head. The other 4 looked like your typical party composed of mostly archers and warrior types. He even spotted a dual dagger rogue that was next to the leader. All of them hovered around the 80th level. This probably gave them enough confidence to pull something like this off. There were a lot of new Tier 2 adventurers that wondered about these dungeons. The bandits here were probably waiting for one of the newbies to make the mistake of wandering out at night. Listen here, I'm tired, so I'm going to overlook this, but you need to move out of the way. Look at this bastard, I think he doesn't realize what situation he is in, boss. One of the bandits laughed while shouting at their leader. After getting closer to the 5, Roland's minimap picked out another person a bit further behind them. This was probably a lookout that was there to signal if any other people came from the other side. Oh no, I know, here, take a look at this. While just standing there, Roland reached towards his belt where he had a satchel. This of course didn't go unnoticed by one of the bandits that let loose his arrow. The man's clearly fumbled out of stress as the other bandits seemed somewhat maddened by the attack. The arrow flew right towards Roland's head, but he did not do anything to evade it. Instead, he continued to dig in his satchel for the item that he wanted to show to the bandits. At the same time as he found it, the arrow collided with the magical barrier that was around his suit of armor. The arrowhead bounced right off while the shaft bent out of shape before breaking into many wooden pieces. The realization of the magical shield made the bandits flinch, but before the battle could continue, Roland held out a large piece of gold. Wait, that is... Yes, it is, will you let me pass now? This large oval coin had a special meaning. On it was the sign of the Thieves' Guild, and it was proof that he was part of the black market merchants. Most of the time it would be enough for the thieves to let him go. Killing and robbing black market merchants was frowned upon by the guild as they produced a lot of gold. Without the merchants there, the thieves would not have any means of selling their wares. It would make their lives a lot harder on both ends if the merchants ceased to exist, so it was counteractive to hurt them. Boss, he is with the merchants, what do we do? What do we do? Nothing, look at that armor, look at that strange golem, we can ditch this city. Yeah, that guy must be rich. It's going to be like this, hey. Roland gave out a sigh before hiding the black merchant token back into his satchel. Sometimes people like this existed that didn't see that big picture. They would rather risk it all for a quick profit. Agni, you know what to do. As the talks broke down, the fight started. The large wolf that was behind the man in the shiny armor tossed itself at the enemy closest to it. The dungeon area was quickly filled with various sounds of explosions and people screaming for mercy. We will be there shortly, my lord. Finally. A certain glamorous carriage with an emblem of a standing stag with a crown on its head slowly made its way towards a certain city. Around this carriage, there were quite a few armored knights in shiny armor. The sound of the hooves echoed through the whole area and made everyone that was close by to the large force that was coming this way. The person inside of the carriage was holding a locket with a certain picture. After glancing at it, he clutched it in his hand strongly. I will come back, just wait for me, this is just a small setback. Soon he placed the locket back around his neck and hid it under his clothes. The moon shone brightly in the night sky, which caused him to look at it. What was the name of this city? Albrook.